Rain hammered the black marble steps of the Virelli estate as Serafina Vale was dragged through the iron gates, her satin dress torn and soaked. They called her punishment, a burden, a mistake the families wanted erased. But when they shoved her toward Dorian Virelli, the most feared mafia king in the city, something impossible happened. He didn't destroy her. He protected her. And that single act of defiance ignited a war that would burn the entire underworld to ash. This is the story of a woman sent to disappear who became a revolution instead. Hit like, drop your city in the comments, and follow this story to the end. Rain hammered the black marble steps of the Virelli estate as Serafina Vale was dragged through the iron gates like cargo. Nobody wanted to claim. Her satin dress clung to her body, torn at the shoulder. Mascara streaked beneath eyes that had forgotten how to produce tears. The two men escorting her laughed too loudly, the kind of nervous laughter cowards used when standing beside violence they didn't control. The iron gates clanged shut behind them with the finality of a coffin lid. "She's yours now," one of them said, shoving her forward hard enough that she stumbled on the wet stone. "Good fucking riddance." Serafina didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing anymore. The hallway stretched ahead like the throat of something enormous and hungry. Dimly lit chandeliers cast shadows that moved wrong, and her bare feet left wet prints on marble so polished she could see her own ruined reflection staring back. She looked like a ghost. Felt like one, too. At the far end of the hall sat Dorian Virelli. Everyone in the city knew his name, whispered it in back rooms and basement bars where men with scarred knuckles conducted business over glasses of bourbon that cost more than most people's rent. A mafia king with a reputation carved from blood, silence, and fear. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice because everyone already knew what happened when he got quiet. He didn't move when they shoved her into the light, didn't blink, didn't smile. Just sat there in a chair that looked more like a throne, one hand resting on the armrest, the other holding a glass of something amber that caught the light like liquid gold. His suit was dark, charcoal or black, she couldn't tell, and fit him the way expensive things fit people who never had to ask the price. His face was all sharp angles and controlled expression, the kind of face that gave away nothing unless he wanted it to. "She embarrassed the family," one of the men said quickly, like he was trying to justify something he knew didn't make sense. "Too difficult. Too visible. Too much trouble." The other one laughed again, that same ugly sound. "Can't control her mouth, can't keep her quiet. Figure you'd know what to do with that." Serafina stood beneath the chandelier glow, trembling not from cold, but from the weight of every humiliation she'd carried for 26 years. Men like Dorian destroyed women like her. That was how the world worked. That was what she'd been promised her entire life. She waited for the violence, the mockery, the confirmation that she was exactly as worthless as everyone had always said. But instead of looking at her, Dorian studied the room, not her body, not her ruined dress, the cruelty around her. His gaze moved slowly from one man to the other, taking in their smirks and their posture and the way they stood too close to her like they owned the air she breathed. Something shifted in his expression, not anger exactly, but something colder, something that made the temperature in the hall drop 10 degrees without the thermostat changing. Then he spoke. "Leave." His voice was quiet, calm, the kind of calm that came right before catastrophic violence. The men froze. "I said leave." It wasn't a request, wasn't a suggestion. It was the kind of command that didn't get questioned because questioning it meant dying slowly in a place nobody would ever find you. Within seconds, the hall emptied. Footsteps echoed and then faded. The iron gates clanged again. Then silence. Now Serafina stood alone with the most feared man in the underworld, and her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack through her ribs. This was it. This was where the nightmare everyone swore would come finally arrived. She braced herself, fingernails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. Dorian set his glass down carefully, stood slowly, walked toward her with measured steps that didn't rush and didn't hesitate. She stopped breathing. Then he moved past her completely, opened the door she'd just been shoved through, and held it. "You're safe here," he said quietly, looking not at her but at the rain still hammering the steps outside. Serafina stared at him like he'd just spoken a language she didn't know existed. "What?" "Safe," he repeated. "You're safe here." I don't... Her voice cracked. I don't understand. Dorian finally looked at her then, and for the first time in her life, someone looked at her like she was human instead of a mistake someone had made and couldn't figure out how to fix. You don't need to, he said. Not yet. He walked away then, back toward the far end of the hall, leaving her standing there dripping rainwater and confusion onto marble that probably cost more than everything she'd ever owned combined. A woman appeared from the side door, older, gray hair pulled back severe, wearing black that matched the aesthetic of the entire estate. She didn't smile, but she didn't sneer either. Come, she said simply. You'll want dry clothes. Serafina followed because she didn't know what else to do. The room they gave her was bigger than the apartment she'd grown up in. High ceilings, tall windows overlooking gardens she couldn't see clearly through the rain. A bed large enough to sleep 4 people comfortably. Furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, not a bedroom. Everything was tasteful and expensive and completely impersonal, like a hotel room designed by someone who understood luxury but not comfort. The older woman, who introduced herself only as Helena, laid out towels and clothes without commentary. Bathroom's through there, Helena said, nodding toward a door. Dinner's at 8 if you're hungry. If not, I'll have something sent up. I don't... Serafina started, then stopped because she didn't know how to finish that sentence, didn't know what was happening, didn't know why she wasn't dead or worse. Helena paused at the door. He doesn't hurt women, she said quietly. Whatever you've heard about Dorian Varelli, that part's true. Then she left. Serafina stood in the center of the room, dripping and shaking, trying to make sense of a world that had just stopped making sense entirely. She'd been handed over like garbage, been dragged through the rain by men who laughed at her humiliation, been shoved toward a monster everyone said would destroy her, and instead he'd opened a door and called her safe. She didn't believe it, couldn't believe it. Belief was a luxury she'd learned to live without a long time ago. She peeled off the ruined dress, left it in a heap on the floor, and stood under shower water hot enough to burn. Scrubbed her skin until it turned red. Washed her hair 3 times. Watched black mascara and rainwater, and everything else spiral down the drain like evidence of a crime scene. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that was somehow both impossibly soft and impossibly heavy, she found the clothes Helena had left. Simple things. Black pants that fit better than they should have. A gray sweater that didn't cling or reveal or demand anything. Socks thick enough to keep her feet warm on marble floors. She dressed slowly, examining every piece for hidden cameras or microphones, or whatever trap she was certain was waiting. Found nothing. By the time 8 o'clock arrived, hunger had overridden suspicion. Barely. She made her way downstairs, following the sound of silverware against china, and found a dining room that looked like something out of a period film. Long table. More chairs than any reasonable dinner party needed. Candles flickering in holders that probably cost more than a car. Dorian sat at one end, reading something on a tablet. A plate of food in front of him he wasn't touching. He looked up when she entered. Sit wherever, he said simply. Serafina chose a chair 3 down from him, close enough to be polite, far enough to run if she needed to. A man in server's attire appeared from nowhere and placed a plate in front of her. Chicken, vegetables, rice. Normal food, nothing designed to humiliate or test or punish. She stared at it. It's not poisoned, Dorian said without looking up from his tablet. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. The bluntness of it should have been terrifying. Instead, it was almost reassuring. At least it was honest. Serafina picked up her fork. Took a bite. The food was good, really good. She hadn't eaten anything that wasn't convenience store garbage or charity handouts in months. Before she realized what she was doing, she'd cleaned half the plate. When did you eat last? Dorian asked, setting the tablet aside. Yesterday, maybe? She didn't look at him. I don't remember. He said nothing for a moment, just watched her with that same unreadable expression. You'll eat 3 times a day here, he said finally. More if you're hungry. Helena will make sure of it. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended, more desperate. Dorian leaned back in his chair. Because starving someone isn't discipline, he said. It's cruelty, and I don't do business with cruelty. You're a mafia boss, Serafina said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Everyone says you've killed more people than... I've killed plenty of people, Dorian interrupted, his voice still calm. Men who trafficked children, men who ran protection rackets on the elderly, men who thought rape was a perk of power. He paused. But I've never raised my hand to someone who couldn't fight back. There's a difference. Serafina stared at him, trying to find the lie in his face. Found nothing but uncomfortable truth. They sent me here to disappear, she said quietly. They told me you'd make me disappear. I know. You know? I know what they expected, Dorian said. I know what they wanted. I know they handed you over hoping I'd solve their embarrassment problem quietly. He stood then, pushing his chair back with a scrape that echoed in the large room. But their expectations aren't my obligations. He left her sitting there, alone with her half-finished plate and 1,000 questions she didn't have words for yet. The mansion became a prison of confusion. Days passed, she wasn't sure how many at first, and nothing terrible happened. No violence, no threats, no locked doors. She wandered the halls cautiously at first, expecting guards to stop her or Helena to redirect her back to her room. Nobody did. Servants bowed respectfully when she passed, like she was a guest instead of whatever she actually was. Guards stepped aside at doorways. In the library, a room with more books than she'd ever seen outside a public building, she spent hours pulling volumes off shelves and reading in a leather chair by a window overlooking gardens that looked expensive to maintain. Nobody bothered her. At dinner, Dorian never mocked her body, never treated her like an object, never demanded gratitude or explanation or anything at all. His silence carried discipline, not cruelty. When he spoke, it was about normal things. The weather, the news, books she might like. Never about why she was there, never about what he wanted from her. It was the absence of expectation that terrified her most. One morning, she woke to find new clothes in her closet. Not sexy things, not revealing things. Just clothes, jeans that fit, sweaters in colors she actually liked, boots with good treads, underwear that didn't come from a discount bin. She almost cried. Instead, she got dressed and went downstairs and found Helena in the kitchen pulling fresh bread from an oven that looked like it belonged in a professional bakery. Who picked these? Serafina asked, gesturing at the clothes she was wearing. I did, Helena said without turning around, based on what I saw you looking at when we went through the donated items last week. You were watching me? Everyone watches everyone here, Helena said simply. That's how you stay alive. But watching and caring are different things. She turned then, met Serafina's eyes directly. Dorian doesn't keep decorations. If you're here for a reason, whether you know it yet or not. What reason? Helena smiled slightly, the first real expression Serafina had seen on her face. That's between you and him, she said. But if I were guessing, you're here because he saw something in you worth protecting, and Dorian Varelli doesn't protect things lightly. But the outside world noticed. Whispers spread through the city like smoke through a building nobody realized was burning. The Mafia Boss had kept the girl. Not as entertainment, not as leverage. Protected. Serafina didn't understand the significance until she overheard a conversation in the study one evening. Two of Dorian's men, she'd learned their names were Marco and Vincent, talking in low voices that carried through the partially open door. Castellano's asking questions, Marco said. Let him ask, Vincent replied. What's he going to do, call the cops? He's calling other families, saying Dorian's gone soft, saying keeping her makes us look weak. Dorian doesn't give a fuck what Castellano thinks. Maybe he should, Marco said carefully. The Rossi family's making noise too, and the Morettis. Everyone's wondering why he's protecting some random girl the families threw away. She's not random, Vincent said, his voice dropping lower. You've seen her. She watches everything, listens to everything. She's smart. Smart doesn't matter if she gets us all killed. There was a pause. You want to be the one to tell Dorian he made a mistake? Vincent asked. Silence. That's what I thought. Serafina pulled back from the door, heart hammering. She'd known her presence was causing problems. How could it not? But hearing it confirmed was different. Hearing men debate whether protecting her was worth dying for made her stomach twist into knots. She found Dorian later that night in his office, reading through papers that looked important and boring. He glanced up when she entered, didn't tell her to leave. They're talking about me, she said without preamble. They're always talking about something. No, I mean, she moved closer. Your men, the other families. Everyone's saying you've gone soft because you're protecting me. Dorian set down the papers. And? She stared at him. And they're going to come after you because of me. And you're just okay with that? I'm okay with a lot of things that most people would find objectionable, Dorian said calmly. That's why I'm still alive and they're worried about whether I've gone soft. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting tonight. Serafina felt frustration rise in her chest like something with claws. Why are you doing this? The question came out harsher than she intended. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I was handed over like garbage and you could have just what? Dorian stood, moved around the desk toward her. Just let them kill you? Just turned you into another cautionary tale about what happens to women who don't know their place? Yes! The word exploded out of her. Yes, because that's what was supposed to happen. That's what everyone expected, and now you've ruined it, and I don't understand why. Dorian stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see his expression clearly. The control, the calculation. The thing beneath both that looked almost like pain. Because the moment I accept what they did to you, he said quietly, I become exactly like them. Serafina felt something crack inside her chest. You don't even know me. I know enough. You know nothing, she said, and tears were burning in her eyes now, threatening to spill over. You know what they told you, that I'm trouble, that I'm too loud, too difficult, too... I know they were terrified of you, Dorian interrupted. I know they handed you over because they couldn't control you, and control is the only thing small men understand. He paused. I know you survived them, and survival like that doesn't come from being nothing. The tears spilled over then, hot and unwelcome. They'll destroy you because of me, she whispered. Dorian's expression didn't change. Then let them try. A heck. The war started 3 days later. Not with bullets or bombs, that would come later, but with phone calls and threats and alliances shifting like sand beneath everyone's feet. Serafina learned about it from Helena, who had sources everywhere and a way of knowing things before they became official knowledge. The Castellano family pulled their support, Helena said, setting down a cup of coffee Serafina hadn't asked for but accepted anyway. The Rossis are meeting with the Morettis tonight. Unofficially. What does that mean? It means they're deciding whether killing Dorian is worth the war it would start, Helena said bluntly, and whether keeping you alive is worth risking their own necks. Serafina's hands shook around the coffee cup. I should leave. Where would you go? Anywhere. Nowhere. It doesn't matter. It matters to Dorian, Helena said, and whether you believe it or not, it matters to the rest of us too. Why? Serafina looked up at her, desperate for an answer that made sense. Why does it matter? Helena sat down across from her, the first time Serafina had ever seen her sit in the middle of the day. Because for 20 years, I've watched Dorian Varelli build an empire on rules everyone else thought were weaknesses, she said. No trafficking, no children, no using women as bargaining chips. Every other family called him soft for it, called him stupid. She paused. But his territory's the only one that doesn't bleed money to police raids and federal investigations. His men are the only ones who don't disappear into witness protection. His empire's the only one that's grown instead of eating itself alive. I don't understand what that has to do with me. It has everything to do with you, Helena said. You're the test case. You're the moment where Dorian has to decide if his rules mean something or if they were just pretty words he used to feel better about being a monster. She stood then, picking up her own coffee. And if he breaks those rules now, every man in this city will know his principles are negotiable. And negotiable principles aren't principles. They're just suggestions. That night, Dorian called a meeting, not in the mansion. That would have been too vulnerable, too exposed. Instead, they met in a warehouse on the waterfront, the kind of place where concrete floors had probably seen blood and nobody asked questions about the stains. Serafina watched from a second-floor office with tinted glass that let her see without being seen. Helena stood beside her, silent, intense. Below, Dorian stood in the center of the warehouse floor. Around him, arranged in a loose semicircle, stood representatives from every major crime family in the city. The Castellanos, the Rossis, the Morettis, the Lombardis. Others whose names Serafina didn't know. Men in expensive suits who trafficked in violence and called it business. "You all know why you're here," Dorian said, his voice carrying in the empty space. "So let's not waste time pretending this is about territory or money or respect." "Then what's it about?" Castellano, a thick man with gray hair and a face like weathered stone, stepped forward. "Because from where I'm standing, it's about you protecting a woman who's not worth protecting." "Define worth," Dorian said calmly. "Don't play word games with me, Varelli. You know exactly what I mean." "Actually, I don't," Dorian said. "So explain it. Explain to me why this woman, who's never hurt any of you, never stolen from you, never threatened your families, isn't worth basic human decency." Rossi, younger, sharper, with eyes that calculated angles, laughed without humor. "Basic human decency? We're not running a charity, Dorian. We're running businesses. And your little protection project is bad for business." "How?" "Makes us look weak," Moretti chimed in. He was the oldest of the group, white-haired and thin. "The family's handed her over for a reason. You keeping her alive undermines that decision, makes us look like we can't control our own." "You can't," Dorian said simply. The temperature in the warehouse dropped. "Careful," Castellano warned. "No, you be careful," Dorian said, his voice still calm but with steel underneath. "You handed over a woman because she embarrassed you, because she existed too loudly, because she refused to disappear politely enough for your comfort." He paused. "That's not strength. That's cowardice." Rossi moved forward, hand dropping to his waistband. "You calling us cowards?" "I'm calling it like I see it," Dorian said. "And what I see are men terrified of a woman who never had any power to hurt them. So terrified you needed me to make her disappear because you couldn't do it yourselves without looking like the monsters you actually are." "Watch yourself, Virelli." "Or what?" Dorian spread his arms. "You'll kill me? Start a war? Burn down the territories I control and hope you can hold them before the feds move in?" He lowered his arms. "Go ahead. Try." The silence that followed felt like the moment before an explosion. Then Castellano laughed, a dark, ugly sound. "You're willing to die for a woman you don't even know?" "I'm willing to die for the principle she represents," Dorian said, "which is more than any of you can say about anything." He turned then, addressing all of them. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "New rules. My territory, my rules. No women used as punishment, no trafficking through my docks or warehouses, no cruelty disguised as business." The warehouse erupted. "You've lost your fucking mind. This is suicide. You think you can just rewrite—" "I don't think," Dorian said, voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "I know. Because my territory makes more money than all of yours combined. Because my men don't flip when the feds come knocking. Because I run an empire while you're all scrambling to hold together fiefdoms." He paused, letting that sink in. "So here's the choice. Accept the new rules and keep doing business with me. Or don't. And watch your operations crumble when I close my territory to anyone who profits from the kind of cruelty that handed Serafina Vale to me in the first place." Moretti stepped forward, face red. "You can't just—" "I already did," Dorian said. "Contracts are void as of midnight tonight. Any organization that wants back in negotiates new terms, with the new rules." He started walking toward the exit. "This is war, Varelli!" Castellano shouted after him. Dorian stopped at the door, looked back over his shoulder. "Then it's a war I'm willing to fight." He left them standing there in the warehouse, fury and confusion radiating off them in waves. Above, Serafina stood frozen, watching through the tinted glass as the most powerful criminals in the city decided whether she was worth killing over. Helena touched her shoulder gently. "Come on," she said quietly. "We need to get back before they realize you were watching." But Serafina couldn't move, couldn't process what she'd just witnessed. A man willing to burn his entire empire to ash rather than compromise on the principle that she, worthless, troublesome, too loud her, deserved to exist safely. "Why?" she whispered, not really asking Helena. Helena answered anyway. "Because some men measure their worth by what they control," she said, "and some measure it by what they're willing to lose." The next morning, Serafina woke to gunfire. Not close, distant, somewhere in the city, but unmistakable. Sharp cracks that echoed wrong off buildings. She bolted upright in bed, heart hammering, and found Helena already in her doorway. "Stay inside, Helena said, voice tight. "Don't go near the windows." "What's happening?" "What Dorian knew would happen," Helena said. "They're testing him, seeing if he'll back down." "People are dying because of me." "People are dying because powerful men don't like being told no," Helena corrected. "There's a difference." But Serafina couldn't see the difference. All she could see was blood spilling in streets because she'd had the audacity to continue breathing. She spent the day pacing her room like a caged animal, listening to distant sirens and trying not to imagine the bodies piling up with her name attached to them like price tags. Dorian didn't come to dinner that night. Neither did he appear the next morning. By the third day, Serafina was ready to climb walls. She found Helena in the kitchen and demanded answers. "Where is he, eh?" "Handling things." "What things?" "Things that keep you breathing," Helena said bluntly. "Things that keep this mansion standing. Things that make sure when you walk outside that door eventually, you don't get a bullet through your skull before you take 3 steps." "I didn't ask for any of this." "Neither did he," Helena said, slamming a pot down harder than necessary. "But here we are anyway." Serafina felt tears burning again. "I should leave. I should just—" "You leave and you're dead within an hour," Helena interrupted. "Every family in this city knows your face now, knows you're the woman Dorian Varelli went to war over. You think they'll just let you walk away? Then what am I supposed to do?" Helena turned to face her fully, expression softer than Serafina had ever seen it. "You're supposed to survive," she said quietly. "You're supposed to be worth the fight he's putting up. And you're supposed to stop thinking of yourself as the problem when you're actually the solution." "That doesn't make any sense." "It will," Helena said. "Eventually." Dorian finally returned on the 4th night, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Blood on his collar. Not his, Serafina hoped. His suit jacket was gone, shirt untucked, the careful polish stripped away to reveal something raw underneath. She found him in his office, staring at papers he wasn't reading. "You're back," she said from the doorway. "I'm back." "Are you—" She stopped. "Are you okay?" He looked up at her then, and she saw exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Define okay. She moved into the room slowly, like approaching something wild that might bolt. "How many people died?" "Fewer than would have if I'd let you disappear," Dorian said. "But more than I wanted. Because of me. Because of them," he corrected, voice sharp. "Because they decided your life was worth less than their pride. Because they chose violence over basic human fucking decency." He stood abruptly, started pacing. "You want to know what happened out there? I'll tell you. Castellano sent men to firebomb one of my warehouses. We caught them before they could finish. Rossi tried to turn 3 of my captains by offering them territory. All 3 told him to fuck off. Moretti—" He stopped, jaw tight. "Moretti put a bounty on your head. 50,000 for anyone who brought him proof you were dead." Serafina felt the blood drain from her face. "I'm so sorry." "Don't." Dorian moved toward her quickly. "Don't you dare apologize for existing. Don't you dare apologize for the violence other people chose. But if you just what?" He was close now, close enough that she could smell gunpowder and smoke on him. "If you just disappeared? If you just died quietly? That's what you think would make this better? It would stop the war. It would validate every piece of cruelty that's ever been inflicted in the name of keeping people in their place," Dorian said, voice low and fierce. "It would tell every scared girl and broken woman in this city that their lives are negotiable. That powerful men get to decide who deserves safety and who deserves erasure." He stepped back, ran a hand through his hair. "You think I'm fighting for you?" he said. "I'm fighting for every person those families have ever discarded. Every woman they've trafficked. Every kid they've disappeared. You're not the problem, Serafina. You're the line in the sand." She stared at him, this exhausted man covered in other people's blood, fighting a war for a principle she didn't fully understand yet. "I don't know how to be worth this," she whispered. Dorian's expression softened slightly. "You already are," he said. "You just don't see it yet." The morning after Dorian's return brought a silence that felt worse than gunfire. Serafina sat in the library with a book she wasn't reading, watching dust particles drift through sunlight that seemed too bright for the darkness settling over the mansion. Every footstep in the hallway made her flinch. Every door closing sounded like a gunshot. Her hand shook when she turned pages she hadn't absorbed a single word from. Helena found her there around noon, carrying a tray with food Serafina hadn't asked for. "You need to eat." "I'm not hungry." "I didn't ask if you were hungry," Helena said, setting the tray down with enough force to make the dishes rattle. "I said you need to eat." Serafina looked up at her, exhaustion making everything feel distant and unreal. "Does it matter? Does any of this matter if people are dying because I'm breathing?" Helena sat down across from her, something she rarely did. The movement felt significant somehow, like a shift in whatever unspoken hierarchy governed the mansion. 3 days ago, Moretti's men grabbed a girl from the east side, Helena said quietly. 16 years old. They were going to sell her to pay off a gambling debt her father owed. Serafina felt her stomach twist. "Dorian's men intercepted the transfer," Helena continued. "Got her out. Got her somewhere safe. You know why they were able to do that?" "I don't, because Dorian's been using this war to dismantle trafficking routes across the city," Helena said. "Every family that's come at him, he's hitting back where it hurts. Their money, their supply lines, their ability to profit off human misery." She paused. "That girl is alive because you're alive. Because Dorian drew a line and refused to compromise on it. That doesn't make the people who died less dead." "No," Helena agreed. "But it makes their deaths mean something. There's a difference between dying to protect cruelty and dying to end it." She stood, picked up the tray again. "Eat," she said. "Or don't. But stop acting like your death would solve anything except making powerful men feel better about being monsters." She left Serafina alone with the food and the weight of words that felt both true and impossible to accept simultaneously. By evening, the mansion had transformed into something that looked more like a military command center than a home. Men Serafina didn't recognize moved through hallways carrying weapons that weren't concealed anymore. Radios crackled with coded messages. Someone had set up computer equipment in what used to be a sitting room, screens displaying maps and locations and information she couldn't begin to parse. She found Marco in the kitchen, drinking coffee that smelled strong enough to strip paint. "What's happening?" she asked. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and slept too little. "War," he said simply. "The real kind." You thought the last few days were war?" Marco laughed without humor. "That was posturing, testing, seeing who'd blink first." He drained his coffee. "Dorian didn't blink, so now they're coming for real." "When?" "Tonight, maybe tomorrow. Whenever they think they've got enough people willing to die for the chance to prove he's vulnerable." Serafina felt ice spread through her chest. "You should leave," she said. "All of you. Just walk away. Let them have whatever they want." Marco studied her for a long moment. "You really don't get it, do you?" "Get what?" "We're not here because Dorian's paying us," he said. "We're here because he's the only boss in this entire fucking city who treats us like human beings instead of assets. Who doesn't make us do things that keep us awake at night. Who draws lines and actually means them." He set his cup down hard enough to crack. "You think I liked trafficking people? You think Vincent enjoyed shaking down shop owners who couldn't afford protection? You think any of us signed up for this life because we wanted to be monsters? I don't." "Dorian gave us a way to be something else," Marco said, voice rough. "Gave us rules that let us sleep at night. Gave us boundaries that made us feel less like we were drowning in blood every day." He looked at her directly. "So no, we're not leaving. We're fighting. Because if Dorian falls, every other boss in this city learns that principles are weaknesses. And then we all go back to being the kind of men who destroy people like you for profit." He left her standing there, alone in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and gunpowder and fear. Gayse. She found Dorian on the terrace overlooking the garden, staring at the city lights like they were enemy positions on a map. He didn't turn when she approached, but she knew he'd heard her. The man was too careful to be surprised by footsteps. "Marco says they're coming tonight," she said. "Marco talks too much." "Is it true?" Dorian was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Probably. They've been consolidating, calling in favors, bringing in outside muscle from families who don't care about the politics, just the payday." "How many?" "Enough. The single word carried the weight of a death sentence. Serafina moved to stand beside him, looking out at the same city that wanted her dead. I could give myself up, she said quietly. Walk out there. Let them... No. You didn't let me finish. I don't need to, Dorian said, finally looking at her. Because whatever plan you're forming that ends with you sacrificing yourself, the answer is no. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended. Why is my life worth more than yours? Worth more than all your men's lives? I'm nobody, Dorian. I'm just... You're the proof that people can survive systems designed to destroy them, Dorian interrupted. You're the evidence that resilience exists even in places where it shouldn't be possible. You're the reason I can look at myself in the mirror and still see something worth salvaging. He turned to face her fully. You want to know the truth? I built this empire on violence, on fear, on being willing to do things other people weren't brutal enough to consider. I told myself it was different because I had rules, because I drew lines, because I refused to traffic kids or rape women or profit off the worst kinds of human suffering. His voice dropped lower. But the moment those families handed you over expecting me to kill you, I realized something. All my rules, all my lines, all my principles, they were only real if I was willing to lose everything defending them. Otherwise, they were just convenient morality I used to feel better about being a monster. You're not a monster. I've killed more people than you can imagine, Dorian said flatly. I've disappeared men who threatened me. I've burned businesses to the ground for refusing protection. I've done things that would keep you awake at night if you knew the details. But you never... But I never hurt people who couldn't fight back, he finished. And that's supposed to make me noble? That's supposed to make me good? He laughed bitterly. I'm not good, Serafina. I'm just less bad than the alternatives. And even that required you showing up to prove it meant anything. She stared at him, this exhausted man carrying the weight of an empire built on compromises with darkness. I don't know how to be what you need me to be, she whispered. I need you to be alive, Dorian said simply. Everything else is negotiable. The attack came at 3 a.m, because of course it did. Serafina woke to the sound of glass shattering and automatic gunfire turning the night into a war zone. She rolled out of bed, hit the floor, scrambled toward the bathroom like Helena had taught her during the drills she'd thought were paranoid overreaction. Turned out they weren't paranoid enough. The hallway outside her room exploded with noise. Shouting, running footsteps, more gunfire. She locked the bathroom door with shaking hands, climbed into the bathtub like that would somehow protect her from bullets, and tried to remember how to breathe through the panic clawing at her throat. Minutes passed like hours. Then the bathroom door exploded inward, torn off its hinges by something that sounded like a bomb, but was probably just a really good kick. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted by hallway light. Big, armed, looking at her like she was a problem he'd been paid to solve. Found her, he said into a radio. Serafina pressed herself against the back of the tub, looking for weapons that didn't exist. Her hands found nothing but soap and shampoo bottles. The man moved toward her. Then his head snapped back violently, body crumpling forward with a hole in his skull that painted the white tiles red. Helena stood in the doorway, holding a pistol that looked too big for her hands, expression completely calm. Come on, she said. We're moving. Serafina climbed out of the tub on legs that barely functioned, stepping over the dead man like she'd done this before, even though she hadn't, even though every part of her was screaming. Helena grabbed her arm, pulled her into the hallway. Chaos everywhere. Bodies. Some she recognized, most she didn't. Blood on marble floors, bullet holes in walls that probably cost more than cars. The chandelier had fallen, crystals scattered across the floor like diamonds at a crime scene. Where's Dorian? Serafina asked, voice barely working. Fighting, Helena said, pulling her down a side corridor. Where he always is when things go bad. They moved through the mansion like rats through a maze, taking turns Serafina didn't know existed, passing through hidden passages behind walls she'd walked past every day without realizing they were hollow. The gunfire got louder. Then suddenly they were in a wine cellar that smelled like earth and expensive alcohol, and Helena was pushing her toward a door that blended into the wall. There's a tunnel, Helena said, pressing something into Serafina's hand. Keys. Goes half a mile east, comes up in a parking garage. Gray sedan, space 42. Get in it. Drive. What about you? I'm going back.
You can't. I've been with Dorian for 20 years, Helena said, checking her pistol with practiced efficiency. You think I'm running now? You'll die. Maybe, Helena agreed, but I'll die making sure you don't. That's the job. She moved toward the stairs.
Helena. The older woman stopped, looked back. Don't waste it, she said quietly. Don't waste what we're buying you. Live, loudly, the way they were always terrified you would. Then she was gone, footsteps fading into gunfire and chaos. Serafina stood alone in the wine cellar, keys biting into her palm, and made a choice. She went back up. Dog. The mansion had transformed into something out of a nightmare. Fire in the east wing, smoke choking the air. Bodies everywhere, some moving, some not. The expensive furniture had been torn apart by bullets. Paintings hung crooked or had fallen completely. Blood-covered marble floors in patterns that looked almost artistic if you didn't think about what they represented. Serafina moved through it all like a ghost, staying low, staying quiet, following the sound of Dorian's voice shouting orders. She found him in what used to be the main hall, behind an overturned table that looked like it had taken 100 rounds. Marco was beside him, bleeding from somewhere but still firing. Vincent was across the hall, covering a different angle. Men she didn't recognize were trying to push through the front entrance. Trying and failing because Dorian's crew was holding the line with the kind of desperate violence that came from knowing retreat meant death. Serafina pressed herself against a wall, watching. Then she saw Helena. The older woman was crossing the hall, moving to cover Marco's blind spot, when one of the attackers got a clear shot. Time slowed. Helena's body jerked backward, the pistol falling from her hand, blood blooming across her chest like a dark flower. She hit the ground hard, didn't get back up. Serafina felt something inside her chest rip apart. She didn't remember moving, didn't remember making the decision. One moment she was against the wall, the next she was running across open space toward Helena's fallen body, bullets chewing up marble all around her. Hands grabbed her, Dorian's hands, yanked her down behind the table hard enough to bruise. "What the fuck are you doing?" he shouted over the gunfire. "Helena's is dead or dying and you can't help her by getting yourself killed." But Serafina could see Helena from here, could see her chest still rising and falling in shallow movements, could see her eyes open and aware and focused on them. Their eyes met across the blood-covered floor. Helena smiled slightly. Then her hand moved, slowly, painfully, towards something at her belt. A grenade. Serafina's blood turned to ice. "No," she whispered. But Helena was already pulling the pin. "Cover!" Dorian shouted, pulling Serafina down, throwing himself over her as Helena rolled the grenade toward the entrance where the attackers were clustered. The explosion shook the entire mansion. When Serafina looked up again, ears ringing, the entrance was gone. Just rubble and smoke and bodies that weren't moving anymore. Helena wasn't moving either. Serafina tried to go to her, but Dorian held her back with iron grip. "She's gone," he said, voice rough. "She's gone, and we need to move now." "I can't." "You can, and you will, because she just died buying us time, and we're not wasting it." He pulled her upright, started moving toward the back of the mansion. Marco and Vincent fell in behind them, both looking like they'd been through a war. They had been through a war, and they were losing. Black. They made it to the garage through passages Serafina didn't know existed, emerging into cold air that tasted like smoke and blood. The gray sedan was exactly where Helena had said it would be. Dorian shoved Serafina toward it. "Get in." "What about you?" "I'm staying." "The hell you are." "Someone needs to make sure they don't follow you," Dorian said, checking his weapon with mechanical precision. "Someone needs to hold them here long enough for you to get clear." "Then I'm staying too." "No." "You don't get to decide." "I'm deciding right now," Dorian said, grabbing her shoulders. "You leave. You disappear. You become someone else somewhere far away from this fucking city." "I won't run." "You'll run because that's the only way any of this means anything," Dorian said, voice harsh. "You'll run because Helena died to give you that chance. Because Marco and Vincent are about to die. Because every person who believed my rules meant something is laying down their life tonight to prove it." Tears were streaming down Serafina's face now. "I can't leave you." "You have to." "Why?" She grabbed his jacket, fists tight in the expensive fabric. "Why do I have to be the one who survives?"
Dorian's expression softened slightly, one hand coming up to touch her face with surprising gentleness. "Because you're the proof it was worth it," he said quietly. "You're the evidence that everything we did, everything we fought for, everything we lost, it meant something." He kissed her forehead once, quick and final. Then he stepped back, raised his weapon, and fired 3 shots into the air. The sound echoed across the garage like a signal flare. "Go," he said. "Now." Serafina stood frozen, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. Behind them, in the mansion, she could hear shouting, running footsteps, more gunfire. They were coming. "Serafina," Dorian said, voice hard now. "Get in the fucking car." Marco appeared from the shadows, blood covering half his face. "I'll drive," he said. "You can hate us later. Move." He grabbed her arm, pulled her toward the sedan. Serafina fought him, tried to get back to Dorian, but Marco was stronger and more desperate. "Boss," Vincent's voice crackled over a radio. "They're in the east corridor, 30 seconds. Dorian looked at Serafina one last time. "Live," he said, loudly. Then he turned and ran back toward the mansion, toward the men coming to kill him, toward a last stand that would buy her the time to escape. Marco shoved her into the passenger seat, climbed behind the wheel, and gunned the engine before she could protest. The sedan peeled out of the garage with the sound of Dorian's gunfire echoing behind them. They drove for hours. Serafina didn't speak. Couldn't speak. Just stared out the window, watching the city lights fade into darkness, watching the distance grow between her and the only place she'd ever felt safe. Marco drove like he was racing death, taking turns too fast, running red lights, checking mirrors obsessively. Blood was still streaming down his face from whatever wound he'd taken. "You're hurt," Serafina said finally, voice hoarse. "I'm alive," Marco corrected, which is more than most people back there can say. "We should go back. We should keep driving. He's going to die." "He was always going to die," Marco said flatly. "The moment he decided you were worth protecting, this ending was written. We all knew it." "Then why—" "What?" "Because some things are worth dying for," Marco said. "Because Dorian gave us permission to be better than we were. Because for the first time in our fucked up criminal lives, we got to fight for something that actually mattered." He wiped blood from his eyes with one hand, didn't slow down. "You know what I did before Dorian?" he asked. "I ran girls, 16, 17 years old, runaways and addicts and desperate women who didn't have anywhere else to go. I'd smile and promise them safety and then sell them to the highest bidder." Serafina felt sick. "I hated myself every single day," Marco continued. "Hated what I saw in the mirror. Hated that I'd become exactly the kind of monster I used to be terrified of when I was a kid." He paused. "Then Dorian took over my territory and gave me a choice. Work for him under new rules or get out. No trafficking, no hurting civilians, no being the kind of man who destroys innocence for profit." "What did you choose?" "I chose to try being human again," Marco said. "Chose to see if redemption was actually possible or just something people talked about to feel better about being irredeemable." And I don't know yet," he admitted, "but dying tonight so you could live? That feels like a pretty good test case." They drove in silence after that. Eventually, Marco pulled off the highway into a rest stop, parked in the darkest corner he could find. "We'll wait here until dawn," he said, "then figure out next steps." "What next steps?" Serafina asked. "Everyone's dead or dying. We're running. There is no next." "There's always a next," Marco said, "even when it feels like there isn't." He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for just a moment. That's when Serafina saw the second wound, the one in his side below the ribs, bleeding steadily into his shirt. "Marco, I know," he said quietly. "I've known since the garage. We need to get you to a hospital." "No hospitals. They'll be watching them." "You're going to die." "Probably," he agreed, "but not before I get you somewhere safe." "Fuck safe," Serafina said, voice cracking. "Fuck all of this. Helena's dead. Dorian's probably dead. You're dying. And for what? So I could keep breathing? So I could run away and hide and pretend none of this happened?" "No," Marco said, opening his eyes to look at her directly. "So you could live the life they never let you have.
So you could be loud and difficult and too much trouble and survive anyway. So every girl who gets told she's not worth protecting has proof that sometimes, people fight back. He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. Dorian once told me that the only way to know if your principles mean anything is whether you're willing to die for them, Marco said. I didn't understand what he meant until tonight. Marco, there's an address in the glove box, he interrupted. Safe house, money, new identity papers, everything you need to disappear completely. I don't want to disappear. Tough shit, Marco said, because that's what we bought you with our lives. Use it. His breathing was getting shallower. Serafina felt panic rising. Don't die, she said, knowing how stupid it sounded. Please, don't die. Promise me something, Marco said, voice barely above a whisper now. What? Promise me you won't waste this. I don't. Promise me, Marco insisted, grabbing her hand with bloody fingers. Promise me you'll live so loud they can't ignore you. Promise me you'll exist so boldly they can't pretend you don't matter. Promise me you'll survive in a way that makes every death tonight mean something. Tears were pouring down Serafina's face. I promise, she whispered. Marco smiled slightly. Good, he said. Then his hand went slack in hers. His breathing stopped. And Serafina sat alone in a car with a dead man in a rest stop parking lot, surrounded by darkness and silence, and the weight of promises she didn't know how to keep. Utrecht. She buried Marco in the woods behind the rest stop, using her bare hands and a tire iron from the trunk. It wasn't deep enough, wasn't proper, would probably be found within days. But it was all she could do. She found the address in the glove box like he'd promised. Cash. New passport with a face that looked like hers but wasn't. Credit cards and a name she didn't recognize. The safe house was 3 states away. She could be there by tomorrow if she drove straight through. Could disappear completely. Could become someone else. Could run so far and so fast that nobody would ever connect her to the blood soaking into expensive marble floors in a mansion that was probably burned to the ground by now. Serafina sat in the driver's seat as dawn painted the sky pink and gold, holding documents that promised salvation through erasure. She thought about Helena, using her last moments to buy time. Thought about Marco, bleeding out slowly just to get her 1 more mile away from danger. Thought about Vincent and Dorian and every other person who'd laid down their life tonight defending a principle that shouldn't have needed defending in the first place. Thought about the girl they'd saved from trafficking, the 16-year-old who was alive because Dorian had drawn a line. Thought about every woman who'd ever been told to disappear quietly for the comfort of powerful men who couldn't handle being challenged. Then she made a choice. She took the cash, left the passport and credit cards, and drove back toward the city. The mansion was exactly as destroyed as she'd imagined. Burned, collapsed in sections. Crime scene tape everywhere. News vans parked in the street broadcasting footage of bodies being carried out in bags. Serafina watched from across the street, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses that probably didn't disguise her at all, counting the body bags. 12, 15, 20. They kept coming. A reporter was interviewing someone, a federal agent maybe, or a detective, and Serafina caught fragments of the conversation. Unprecedented violence, organized crime war, multiple families involved, still searching for survivors. Survivors. The word echoed in Serafina's head. She waited until the news van started packing up, until the crowd thinned, until she could move without being obvious. Then she approached one of the police officers standing guard. I need to speak to whoever's in charge, she said. The officer looked at her with the tired eyes of someone who'd been working too many hours straight. Ma'am, this is an active crime scene. My name is Serafina Vale, she interrupted, and I'm the reason all those people are dead. The officer's hand dropped to his weapon instinctively. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to... I'm not armed, Serafina said, raising her hand slowly. I'm not dangerous. I'm just tired of running. Within minutes, she was surrounded by police, weapons drawn, being shouted at from multiple directions to get on the ground, to put her hands behind her head, to not fucking move. She did exactly what they said. Let them cuff her. Let them search her. Let them shove her into the back of a police car like she was evidence instead of a person. Through the window, she watched the mansion smoldering, watched them carry out more body bags. Wondered if Dorian was in one of them,
or if he'd somehow survived. Wondered if survival would be better or worse than dying like Helena and Marco had died. Wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life or the only choice that would let her sleep at night eventually. The police car pulled away from the curb, heading toward a future Serafina couldn't predict and couldn't control. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't being dragged. She was choosing, and that, somehow, made all the difference. The interrogation room was exactly what she expected. Gray walls, metal table, uncomfortable chairs, a mirror that was obviously one-way glass, fluorescent lights that made everything look sick and tired. 2 detectives sat across from her, a man who looked like he'd seen too much, and a woman who looked like she'd stopped being surprised by anything years ago. "Let's start from the beginning," the woman said, setting down a recorder. "Your name is Serafina Vale?" "Yes. And you're claiming responsibility for the deaths at the Varelli estate?" "No," Serafina said carefully. "I'm claiming I'm the reason. There's a difference." The male detective leaned forward. "Walk us through that difference." So she did. She told them everything, the families who'd discarded her, being handed over to Dorian, his refusal to kill her. The war that started because he'd protected her instead of erasing her. Helena and Marco and Vincent and everyone else who died defending a principle that shouldn't have needed defending. She spoke for hours, told them about trafficking routes being dismantled, about girls being saved, about men who'd chosen redemption over profit, about an empire built on violence, trying to become something less monstrous. The detectives listened without interrupting. When she finally stopped talking, her voice hoarse and her throat raw, the woman detective sat back. "That's quite a story. It's the truth." "The truth is, we've got 23 dead bodies, and you're the only survivor willing to talk," the male detective said. "Everyone else is either dead, disappeared, or lawyered up so tight we can't get near them." "I'm not trying to protect anyone," Serafina said. "I'm trying to make sure they died for something instead of nothing." "Noble," the woman said, "but it doesn't change the body count." "No," Serafina agreed. "It doesn't." She leaned forward, meeting their eyes directly. "But it changes what the body count means. It changes the story from crime families kill each other over territory to people died trying to stop human trafficking and systemic cruelty." "You're asking us to make you a hero," the male detective said skeptically. "I'm asking you to tell the truth," Serafina corrected. "I'm asking you to not let powerful men rewrite this as gang violence when it was actually revolution." The detectives exchanged a look. "We'll need to verify everything you've told us," the woman said finally. "Verify away," Serafina said. "Search the mansion, pull financial records, talk to the families. You'll find exactly what I said you'd find." "And if we do? If everything checks out? What do you think happens then?" Serafina smiled without humor. "Then either I become evidence that the system can change," she said, "or I become evidence that it can't. Either way, people will know what happened here. Either way, every girl who's ever been told to disappear quietly will know someone fought back." She stood, hands still cuffed behind her. "That's all I wanted. That's all any of them wanted. For it to matter. For it to count. For it to be more than just another crime statistic nobody remembers." The detectives didn't stop her from standing, didn't tell her to sit back down, just watched her with expressions that were impossible to read. Finally, the woman detective stood too. "We'll be in touch," she said. "I'll be here," Serafina replied. "I'm not running anymore." Okay. They kept her in holding for 3 days while they verified her story. The cell was small and cold and smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. Serafina sat on the thin mattress and stared at concrete walls and wondered if Dorian was alive or dead or something in between. Wondered if Helena had felt pain before she died, or if the explosion had been quick. Wondered if Marco had known she'd come back instead of running. Wondered if any of them would approve of what she was doing, or if they'd be furious she'd wasted the escape they'd bought her. On the 4th day, the female detective, who'd introduced herself as Detective Chen somewhere in the blur of interrogations, returned. "Your story checks out," she said without preamble. "Financial records show exactly what you said. Trafficking routes dismantled, girls rescued, families in chaos because Dorian Varelli decided to rewrite the rules." "Good. It's complicated," Chen corrected. "Because, yes, people were saved, but people also died, violently, and the law doesn't really have a category for beneficial mass murder. I'm not asking for him to be pardoned, Serafina said. I'm asking for the truth to be told. The truth is messy, Chen said, sitting down across from her. The truth is Dorian Varelli killed people and saved people. Built an empire on violence and tried to make it less violent. Was a monster and tried to be something better. She paused. The truth is you walked into a nightmare and somehow became the reason people tried to be less nightmarish, and I don't know what to do with that except tell you what we found. Serafina's heart stopped. Is he alive? Chen's expression flickered. We found him in the basement of the mansion, she said quietly. Shot twice. Blood loss. Smoke inhalation. He should be dead. But he's not, Chen said. He's at Metro General under guard. Critical condition. They're not sure he'll make it another 72 hours. Serafina stood abruptly. I need to see him. I need to see him, Serafina repeated, voice harder now. He's dying because he protected me. The least I can do is be there. Chen studied her for a long moment. You understand if he survives, he's facing about 100 charges? That he'll never be free again? I understand. You understand you'll be testifying against him? That everything you told us will be used in court? I understand that too, Serafina said. But he's dying, and I need to see him before he does. Please. Detective Chen stood slowly. Against my better judgment, she said, I'm going to make that happen. But Serafina? Yeah? Don't waste what they gave you. Don't waste what they died for, because if you do, I'll arrest you myself just on principle. Serafina smiled slightly, the first real smile in days. I won't, she said. I promise. Chen nodded. Let's go see a dying mafia king. Metro General's ICU smelled like antiseptic and dying hope. Serafina walked through hallways that hummed with machines keeping people alive, past rooms full of broken bodies being held together by medicine and faith, toward the guarded room at the end where Dorian Varelli was either breathing or not breathing anymore. The officer outside his door looked at her with recognition and something that might have been respect. 10 minutes, he said. That's all they're allowing. 10 minutes is enough. She pushed through the door. Dorian looked like death warmed over. Tubes everywhere. Machines beeping. Bandages covering most of his torso. His face was pale, bruised, swollen. His breathing was shallow and mechanical, assisted by equipment that looked like it was doing most of the work. But he was alive. Serafina moved to his bedside, took his hand carefully, felt how cold it was. Hey, she said softly. It's me. His eyes didn't open. I know you probably can't hear this, she continued, but I need to say it anyway. I need you to know that I didn't run, that I came back, that I'm telling everyone what you did and why you did it. A machine beeped steadily. Helena died, Serafina said, tears burning now. She used a grenade to buy us time. Marco died getting me away. Vincent, I don't know about Vincent. I don't know who else made it and who didn't. She squeezed his hand gently. But they all died believing it mattered, believing you drew a line that meant something, believing principles were worth more than survival. His breathing didn't change. I'm going to testify, she said. I'm going to tell every single person who'll listen what happened here, what you built, what you tried to become, what you were willing to lose to protect someone who was supposed to disappear. She leaned closer. And I'm going to live so loud they can't ignore me. I'm going to exist so boldly they can't pretend I don't matter. I'm going to survive in a way that makes every death worth something. She kissed his forehead gently. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing me as human when everyone else saw me as garbage. Thank you for fighting when running would have been easier. Thank you for proving that redemption is possible, even in places where it shouldn't be. She straightened, wiping tears from her face. I hope you survive this, she said. I hope you wake up and find out you started something that can't be stopped. I hope you get to see what your defiance created. She turned to leave, then stopped because Dorian's hand, the one she'd been holding, had tightened slightly around her fingers. She looked back. His eyes were open, barely, unfocused and struggling, but open, and looking at her like she was the last thing he needed to see before he could rest. Don't. His voice was barely audible, broken by the breathing tube. Don't waste it. I won't, Serafina promised. Liv. He coughed, machines beeping frantically. Loudly. I will. His hand went slack again, his eyes closed. But he was still breathing, still fighting, still refusing to die quietly like everyone expected him to. Serafina left the room with Detective Chen waiting outside, face carefully neutral. How is he? Alive, Serafina said, and apparently determined to stay that way long enough to see what happens next. What does happen next? Chen asked. Serafina looked at her directly. Next I tell my story, she said, loud enough that every family in this city hears it. Loud enough that every girl who's ever been handed over as punishment knows someone fought back. Loud enough that it can't be buried or rewritten or forgotten. She paused. Next, I become exactly what they were terrified I'd be. Someone who refuses to disappear. Chen nodded slowly. Then let's make sure your voice carries, she said. They walked down the hospital corridor together toward a future neither of them could predict, but both of them were determined to shape anyway. Behind them, in the ICU, Dorian Varelli kept breathing, kept fighting, kept refusing to let the story end the way everyone expected. And somewhere in the ruined mansion that used to be an empire, evidence was being collected that would change everything about how the city understood power, cruelty, and the possibility of redemption. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, Serafina Vale wasn't running from it. She was walking straight toward it with her head up and her voice ready and absolutely nothing left to lose. The press conference was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 10. Serafina sat in a conference room at the police station, watching Detective Chen coordinate with federal prosecutors and media liaisons, and people whose titles she didn't fully understand, but whose importance was obvious from the way everyone deferred to them. You'll make a statement, Chen explained, setting down a stack of papers that looked like they'd been written by lawyers who'd never had a conversation with an actual human. Keep it brief. Factual. Don't embellish. Don't editorialize. Just tell them what happened. And then what? Then we open it up for questions, Chen said. Which is where it gets messy. They're going to ask about Dorian, about the families, about your role in all of this, about whether you're a victim or an accomplice. What should I say? The truth, Chen said simply. Whatever that is for you. Serafina looked at the prepared statement, reading words that felt sanitized and safe, and completely divorced from the reality of watching Helena die or holding Marco's hand while he bled out. This doesn't sound like me, she said quietly. It's not supposed to sound like you, Chen replied. It's supposed to keep you from getting charged as an accessory after the fact. I don't care about that. Chen stopped what she was doing, turned to look at Serafina directly. You should care. Because if you go up there and say the wrong thing, every family lawyer in this city will use your words to bury you. They'll paint you as a willing participant, a co-conspirator, someone who orchestrated this whole thing to take down their operations. That's insane. That's how the law works when you're inconvenient, Chen said flatly. Rich men don't go to prison if they can find someone else to blame. And you're very blamable right now. Serafina felt cold spread through her chest. So I'm supposed to lie? You're supposed to be strategic, Chen corrected. There's a difference between lying and not volunteering information that will get you killed. Helena didn't die so I could be strategic. Helena died so you could survive, Chen said, voice harder now. And survival sometimes means knowing when to shut up. They stared at each other across the conference table, two women who understood different kinds of violence trying to find common ground. Finally, Chen sighed. Look, she said, I'm not telling you to compromise. I'm telling you to be smart. Tell your truth, but tell it in a way that doesn't hand them ammunition to destroy you with. She pushed the prepared statement closer. Read it. Think about it. Change what you need to change. But remember that words have consequences, and consequences have body counts. Then she left Serafina alone with papers that felt like traps, and a decision that felt like choosing between betrayal and suicide. Serafina rewrote the statement 3 times. Each version felt wrong in different ways. Too cold, too emotional, too defensive, too apologetic, too much like she was trying to justify something that shouldn't need justification. Finally, she gave up and wrote what she actually wanted to say, consequences be damned. She was halfway through the 4th draft
when the door opened and a man she didn't recognize entered. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive haircut. Everything about him screamed money and power and the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. "Miss Vale," he said, extending a hand she didn't shake. "My name is Richard Castellano. I represent the Castellano family's legal interests." Serafina's blood turned to ice. "Get out. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. I think I'll call Detective Chen and have you removed." "By all means," Castellano said, sitting down uninvited. "But you might want to hear my offer first." "I don't want anything from you." "Not even the truth about Dorian Varelli?" The words hung in the air like poison. Serafina stared at him, trying to find the angle, the trap, the reason a Castellano family lawyer was in this room offering her anything. "What truth?" Castellano smiled, the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. "The truth about why he really protected you," he said. "The truth about what he was actually fighting for. The truth that's going to break your heart if you're smart enough to understand it." "You're lying." "Am I?" Castellano pulled out a tablet, set it on the table, turned it to face her. "Then explain these." The screen showed financial records, account numbers, transfers, dates going back months before Serafina had ever been handed over to Dorian. She stared at them, not understanding what she was looking at. "Those are payments," Castellano said helpfully, "from Dorian Varelli to various federal agencies, the FBI, the DEA, the Justice Department." So Dorian Varelli wasn't a mafia king trying to reform, Castellano said, voice dripping with false sympathy. He was a federal informant, had been for 2 years. Every piece of information about trafficking routes, every detail about criminal operations, every name he gave you, all of it went straight to law enforcement. Serafina felt the room tilt. "You're lying." "I wish I was," Castellano said, "because it would make my job easier if you were just a naive girl who got swept up in mob violence. But you're not. You're evidence. You're the reason Dorian needed to look like he was taking a moral stand." He swiped to another document. "That's the deal he made with federal prosecutors," Castellano continued. "Full immunity for everything he'd done in exchange for dismantling the 5 major crime families in the city. The trafficking routes he shut down, that wasn't morality. That was gathering evidence. The women he saved, witnesses, the war he started by protecting you." He leaned forward. "The perfect cover for the largest organized crime investigation in the city's history. And you were the bait, the distraction, the human shield he needed to make everyone believe he'd actually grown a conscience." "No," Serafina whispered. "But the documents looked real. The numbers looked real. The signatures looked real." "He played you," Castellano said, voice gentle in the way predators are gentle right before they strike. "Used your genuine suffering to manufacture a crisis that gave him cover to destroy his competitors while keeping federal protection. You thought you were his revolution? You were his cover story." Serafina couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was hearing. "Every person who died," Castellano said quietly, "died for a lie. Helena, Marco, Vincent, all of them. They thought they were fighting for principles. They were actually fighting for a federal investigation that was going to send them all to prison anyway." He stood, straightened his suit. "The press conference is in 40 minutes, he said. "You can tell them the truth, that you were a pawn in a federal sting operation, and everyone who died was collateral damage in a larger game. Or you can stick to your romantic narrative about monsters finding redemption and watch the evidence destroy that story piece by piece in court." He moved toward the door. "Either way, Miss Vale, you need to understand something. The man you think you knew, he never existed. The empire you think he tried to reform, it was already sold to the highest bidder. The love you think he showed you?" Castellano smiled. "That was just really good acting." He left. The door clicked shut, and Serafina sat alone with documents that either proved everything she believed was a lie or proved that Castellano was a very good liar himself. She had no idea which. "Adult?" Detective Chen found her 20 minutes later, still staring at the tablet like it might spontaneously combust and take the truth with it. "Who gave you that?" Chen asked, voice tight. "Castellano's lawyer." Chen grabbed the tablet, scrolled through the documents, her expression darkening with every swipe. "Fuck," she said finally. "So it's true.
Chen didn't answer immediately. Is it true? Serafina demanded, voice rising. Was Dorian working with the feds? Was everything a lie? It's complicated, Chen said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now, Chen said, setting the tablet down. Because yes, there was a federal investigation. Yes, Dorian was cooperating with it. But the timeline… I don't care about the timeline, Serafina was shouting now, standing, fists clenched. I care about whether everything I believed was bullshit. I care about whether Helena died for a lie. I care about whether I'm standing here ready to tell the world a story that's completely false. Chen grabbed her shoulders, forced her to meet her eyes. Listen to me, she said. Castellano showed you those documents because he wants you to self-destruct at the press conference. He wants you confused and angry and unreliable. He wants the narrative to be unstable woman lies about mob violence instead of crime families engaged in systemic cruelty. But are the documents real? Chen's jaw tightened. Some of them, she admitted. The investigation is real. Dorian's cooperation is real. But the interpretation, the idea that you were just bait, that everything was calculated, that he never actually cared, that's the lie. That's the spin Castellano wants you to believe. How do you know? Because I've seen men who don't care, Chen said flatly. I've seen men who use people as pawns, and Dorian Varelli nearly died protecting you. Pawns don't get that kind of protection. Cover stories don't get that kind of loyalty. But if he was working with the feds, then he was trying to do both, Chen interrupted, trying to bring down the families and protect you, trying to cooperate with an investigation and maintain his principles, trying to be the monster and the man simultaneously. She released Serafina's shoulders. I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm not saying he didn't make deals that compromised his integrity. I'm saying the truth is more complicated than Castellano wants you to believe, and more complicated than the story you wanted to tell. Serafina felt tears burning. I don't know what's real anymore. Welcome to my entire career, Chen said without humor. Nothing's ever as simple as we want it to be. Heroes are compromised. Villains have reasons. Victims make choices that implicate them. Survivors carry guilt that isn't theirs. She picked up the tablet. The question isn't whether Dorian was perfect. He wasn't. The question is whether what he fought for still matters, even if his motives were mixed. Whether the women he saved are less saved because he was also gathering evidence. Whether your survival means less because it served multiple purposes. Does it? You tell me, Chen said. Because you're the one who has to walk up to those microphones in 20 minutes and decide what story this city hears. What? The press room was packed, cameras everywhere, reporters shoulder to shoulder, federal prosecutors standing in the back looking like they were waiting for something to explode, lawyers for 3 different crime families sitting in the front row like they were attending a funeral. Serafina stood backstage, hands shaking, looking at the prepared statement that felt more like a suicide note with every passing second. Chen appeared beside her, handed her a cup of water she didn't want. You don't have to do this, Chen said quietly. Yes, I do. You could walk away, right now. We have enough evidence to prosecute without your testimony. You could disappear, become someone else, live the quiet life they never let you have. That's not living, Serafina said. That's just slower dying. Chen nodded slowly. Then tell them what you need to tell them. But Serafina? Yeah? Whatever you say up there, make sure you can live with it, because words don't have undo buttons. You can't take them back after they're recorded and broadcast and turned into ammunition. I know. Do you? Chen asked. Because once you start talking, everything changes. Your life, your safety, your ability to ever be anonymous again. You become public property, a symbol, a cautionary tale, or an inspiration depending on who's telling the story. Good, Serafina said. I'm tired of being invisible. A production assistant appeared, wearing a headset and carrying a clipboard. 2 minutes, Miss Vale. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs. She walked toward the stage, Chen following, the prepared statement still clutched in her hand. At the curtain, she stopped, looked at the papers, then handed them back to Chen. What are you doing? Chen asked. Telling my truth, Serafina said, not their version of it. Serafina. I'm tired of being strategic, she interrupted. I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of measuring my words so I don't upset powerful men who've never measured theirs. She stepped through the curtain into blinding camera lights. The room fell silent. Serafina moved to the podium, gripped its edges to keep her hands from shaking, looked out at the sea of faces waiting to judge her. "My name is Serafina Vale," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "And I was sent to Dorian Varelli to disappear." The cameras flashed like lightning. "The families who discarded me expected him to kill me, or worse, they expected him to solve their embarrassment quietly. They expected him to be the kind of monster who destroys inconvenient women without hesitation." She paused. He wasn't. Someone in the front row shifted. Instead, he protected me, fed me, gave me safety I'd never experienced before. And when the families came for him because of that protection, he fought back, started a war, drew lines, made rules, changed the entire structure of organized crime in this city. The Castellano lawyer was watching her with calculating eyes. "People died," Serafina continued. "Good people. People who believed in something worth fighting for. Helena, Marco, Vincent, others whose names I never learned. They died because Dorian refused to compromise on the principle that I deserved to exist safely." She gripped the podium harder. "This morning I was shown evidence that Dorian was cooperating with federal investigators, that his protection of me might have served multiple purposes, that the war he started gave him cover to dismantle criminal operations while gathering evidence." Murmurs rippled through the room. "And I don't know what to do with that information," Serafina admitted. "I don't know how to reconcile the man who nearly died protecting me with the man who might have been using me as a cover story. I don't know if those two things can both be true, or if one negates the other." She looked directly at the cameras. "But I know this. 16-year-old girls were saved from trafficking. Women who were being used as punishment were protected. Roots that profited from human suffering were dismantled. And regardless of Dorian's motives, regardless of whether he was trying to atone or gather evidence or both simultaneously, those things still happened. Those lives still matter." The room was completely silent now. "So I'm not going to stand here and tell you Dorian Varelli was a hero," Serafina said. "Because heroes don't build empires on violence. Heroes don't kill people. Heroes don't make deals with federal prosecutors while running criminal organizations." She paused. "But I'm also not going to tell you he was just a monster, because monsters don't protect women. Monsters don't draw lines. Monsters don't die defending principles they could have abandoned safely." Her voice grew stronger. "What I'm telling you is that people are complicated, that redemption is messy, that trying to be better than you were doesn't erase what you've been, and that my survival, flawed and compromised and complicated as it is, still means something." She looked directly at the Castellano lawyer. "You want me to be a simple story, a victim or a villain, a pawn or a participant, innocent or guilty. But I'm none of those things cleanly. I'm a woman who survived a system designed to destroy me, who watched people die protecting her, who doesn't know if she was saved or used or both, who has to live with that uncertainty every single day." She stepped back from the podium. "That's my truth. It's not neat. It's not satisfying. It doesn't fit into legal categories or media narratives, but it's what I have, and it's all I'm offering." She turned to walk away. "Miss Vale," a reporter shouted, "do you believe Dorian Varelli loved you or used you?" Serafina stopped, turned back. "I believe both are possible," she said quietly. "I believe people contain multitudes. I believe you can genuinely care about someone while also using them for larger purposes. I believe Dorian was trying to be better than he was while still being exactly who he'd always been." "So which is it?" another reporter pressed. "Hero or villain?" "Neither," Serafina said. "Both. Something in between that doesn't have a name yet." She walked off the stage to chaos erupting behind her. Detective Chen caught up with her in the hallway outside the press room. "That was either brilliant or catastrophic," Chen said. "I honestly can't tell which." "Does it matter?" "Probably not," Chen admitted. "You just made yourself the most talked about woman in the city. Every news station is going to run that clip. Every lawyer is going to dissect your words. Every family is going to decide whether you're a threat or an opportunity." "Good." Chen grabbed her arm, stopped her. "Serafina, they're going to come after you now. Not with guns necessarily, but with subpoenas and lawsuits and character assassination. They're going to dig up every mistake you've ever made, every bad choice, every moment of vulnerability, and they're going to use it to destroy your credibility.
Let them try. This isn't bravado, Chen said urgently. This is your life, your safety, your ability to walk down the street without being recognized and vilified. I know. Do you? Chen's grip tightened. Because I've seen what happens to women who become symbols. They get torn apart. They get reduced to hashtags and hot takes and ammunition for arguments they never wanted to be part of. Serafina met her eyes directly. Then I'll be the first one who survives it, she said. Because I've survived worse. And because Helena and Marco didn't die so I could stay quiet. Chen released her arm slowly. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless. Probably both, Serafina said. Like everything else about me. She started walking again. Behind them, the press room exploded with shouted questions and competing narratives and the sound of a story being written in real time. The backlash started within hours. Social media erupted. Twitter threads dissecting every word she'd said. Facebook posts calling her a liar, a hero, a manipulator, a victim. News stations running panel discussions with lawyers and psychologists and people who'd never met her explaining what she really meant. Serafina watched it all from a hotel room Chen had stashed her in, scrolling through her phone with a kind of detached horror. Mob boss's mistress claims victimhood. Woman admits being used as cover for federal investigation. Serafina Vale. Hero or opportunist? Families demand investigation into Vale's role in organized crime war. The comments were worse. She knew what she was getting into. Probably orchestrated the whole thing for attention. Women like her always play victim after enabling violence. I hope she rots in prison with her boyfriend. But there were other comments, too. Finally, someone telling the truth about surviving abusive systems. Her honesty about being used is devastating and necessary. Every woman who's ever been discarded by powerful men needs to hear this. She survived. That's all that matters. Serafina set the phone down, feeling sick. Someone knocked on the hotel room door, 2 sharp raps that made her jump. She looked through the peephole. Detective Chen stood outside holding a manila envelope that looked ominous. Serafina opened the door. We have a problem, Chen said without preamble. Just one? Chen didn't smile. The federal prosecutors pulled Dorian's cooperation agreement, she said, coming inside and closing the door. They're claiming your press conference compromised their investigation. How? By revealing that he was working with law enforcement, Chen said. Now every defendant in every case tied to that investigation can claim their due process was violated because you publicly disclosed confidential information. Serafina felt her stomach drop. I didn't know it was confidential. Doesn't matter, Chen said. The damage is done. Cases are already being dismissed. Defense attorneys are filing motions. Everything Dorian worked for, everyone he helped put away, it's falling apart. How many people? 17 trafficking cases, 9 racketeering indictments, 4 murder prosecutions. Chen set the envelope on the table. All of them compromised, all of them probably walking. Serafina couldn't breathe. I destroyed it, she whispered. I destroyed everything. You didn't know, Chen said. That doesn't matter, Serafina shouted. Helena died so those cases could happen. Marco died protecting evidence. And I just threw it away because I wanted to be honest. You wanted to tell your truth. My truth just freed 17 human traffickers. Serafina was pacing now, hands in her hair. My truth just put murderers back on the street. My truth just made every death meaningless. Chen grabbed her, forced her to stop moving. Listen to me, she said firmly. You made a choice. It had consequences. Some of them are terrible. But you didn't know, and you can't undo it. And falling apart right now doesn't help anyone. What does help? I don't know yet, Chen admitted, but I know self-destruction isn't it. Someone knocked again, harder this time, more insistent. Chen's hand dropped to her weapon instinctively. Who is it? She called. Federal agents. Open the door. Chen and Serafina exchanged a look. Chen opened the door slowly. 2 men in suits stood outside, holding badges and expressions that promised nothing good. Serafina Vale? The taller one said. Yes. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to interfere with a federal investigation. The world tilted. What? Chen stepped forward. On what grounds? On the grounds that she publicly disclosed confidential investigative information with full knowledge that it would compromise ongoing prosecutions, the agent said, pulling out handcuffs. She didn't have full knowledge. She admitted in her press conference that she'd been shown evidence about the investigation this morning, the agent said. That establishes knowledge. Her subsequent disclosure establishes intent.
That's bullshit, Chen said. She was set up by defense attorneys trying to tank your cases. Then she should have been more careful, the agent said flatly. Miss Vale, hands behind your back. Serafina stood frozen, watching her life implode in real time. Chen, she said quietly. Don't say anything, Chen ordered. Don't answer questions, don't make statements. I'll get you a lawyer. Chen, don't, Chen repeated. Just keep your mouth shut for once in your life.
The handcuffs clicked around Serafina's wrists with the sound of finality. They led her out of the hotel room, through hallways where guests stared, into an elevator that smelled like fear and cleaning products, out into a lobby where cameras were already waiting because of course they were. The footage would be everywhere within minutes. Serafina Vale, the woman who'd stood at a podium that morning demanding truth and accountability, being perp-walked in handcuffs like a common criminal. The agent shoved her into the back of an unmarked car. Through the window, she watched Chen on her phone, pacing, already fighting battles Serafina didn't know how to win. The car pulled away from the hotel, and Serafina sat in the back seat, handcuffed and silent, wondering if this was how it ended. Not with redemption, not with revolution, but with good intentions destroying everything they touched and leaving nothing but ash and regret in their wake. The federal holding facility was colder than the police station had been. They processed her like a package. Fingerprints, photos, inventory of belongings she didn't have because she'd been living in a hotel with nothing but borrowed clothes and borrowed time. Then they put her in a cell. Not a holding cell like before. A real cell. With bars and a metal toilet and a mattress that smelled like institutional misery. Serafina sat on the mattress and stared at concrete walls and tried to understand how telling the truth had become a federal crime. Hours passed. Maybe days. Time moved differently in places designed to break you. Finally, a guard appeared, unlocked the cell, told her she had a visitor. She expected Chen, got someone else entirely. The woman who walked into the visitor's room was in her 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than Serafina had earned in her entire life, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than the suit. Miss Vale, she said, sitting down across from Serafina without waiting for invitation. My name is Margaret Cross. I'm an attorney specializing in federal prosecutions and media law. I can't afford you. I'm not asking you to, Cross said, opening her briefcase and pulling out documents. I'm here because Detective Chen called in some favors, because the ACLU thinks your case is interesting, and because I personally believe what they're doing to you is unconstitutional retaliation. They're saying I obstructed justice. They're saying that because 17 human traffickers are about to walk free and they need someone to blame who isn't themselves, Cross corrected. You're convenient. You're public. You're the perfect scapegoat for prosecutorial failures they don't want to take responsibility for. She set down the documents. Here's the truth. You didn't obstruct anything. You disclosed information that was already being strategically leaked by defense attorneys specifically to tank the cases. You were played, used, manipulated into becoming the excuse they needed to dismiss charges that were already on shaky ground. So I'm innocent? Legally? Probably, Cross said. Practically? You're facing a federal prosecutor who needs a conviction to save face and a media circus that's already decided you're either a hero or a villain, depending on who's telling the story. Which am I? Cross smiled slightly. You're a woman who told the truth in a system that punishes honesty, she said, which means you're exactly the kind of client I take on. She pulled out more papers. I can fight this. I can probably win. But it's going to be ugly. They're going to dig up everything about you, every mistake, every vulnerability, every moment of your life that can be twisted into evidence of bad character. I've survived worse, Serafina said. Have you? Cross leaned forward. Because I'm talking about your entire life becoming public record, every trauma, every violation, every moment you've spent trying to survive systems designed to destroy you, all of it laid out in court documents and news articles and social media threads for everyone to pick apart. Serafina was quiet for a moment. Will it help anyone? She asked finally. What? My testimony, my case. Will it help anyone else survive what I survived? Cross studied her with new appreciation. It might, she admitted. If we frame it right, if we make it about systemic failures instead of individual choices, if we use the trial as a platform to expose how the system protects powerful men while punishing inconvenient women, then let's do that, Serafina said. You understand what you're signing up for?
I understand that Helena died so I could have a voice, Serafina said. I understand that Marco bled out getting me somewhere safe. I understand that Dorian nearly died protecting a principle that shouldn't have needed protecting. She looked at Cross directly. I understand that the only way any of it means anything is if I refuse to stay quiet, even when it costs me everything. Cross nodded slowly. Then we have a case, she said. A hell of a case. The kind that changes things or destroys you trying. Both, Serafina said. Probably both. Probably, Cross agreed. She gathered her papers, stood. I'll file motions tomorrow. Get you out on bail by the end of the week. Start building the defense that turns you from scapegoat to symbol. She paused at the door. Serafina, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we lose, that despite everything, despite the truth, despite the rightness of your cause, you end up in prison anyway. Because the system doesn't always reward honesty. Sometimes it just punishes inconvenience more efficiently. I know, Serafina said. And you're still willing to fight? I don't know how to do anything else anymore. Cross smiled, a real smile this time. Good, she said, because we're about to wage war on the entire federal justice system, and I need someone who's too stubborn to know when they're beaten. She left. The guard locked the door behind her, and Serafina sat alone in a federal holding cell, facing charges that could send her to prison for years, and felt something that might have been peace, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't being dragged, wasn't being used, wasn't being silenced. She was choosing, even if that choice destroyed her, even if that choice cost her everything, even if that choice meant dying in a cell for the crime of telling the truth. It was still hers, and that made all the difference. But sick. 3 days later, Margaret Cross got her released on bail. Serafina walked out of the federal facility into camera flashes and shouted questions and a world that had decided who she was without ever asking her. Detective Chen was waiting by an unmarked car, looking exhausted. Get in, she said, before they surround us completely. Serafina climbed into the passenger seat, Chen behind the wheel, and they pulled away from the circus. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, Chen said. Somewhere the media can't find you until you're ready to be found. They drove in silence for a while. Finally, Chen spoke. Dorian woke up. Serafina's heart stopped. When? Yesterday, Chen said. Still critical, still under guard, but conscious. Talking. Asking about you. What did you tell him? I told him you burned down everything he built and got arrested for it, Chen said flatly. He laughed, said that sounded exactly like something you'd do. Serafina felt tears burning. Can I see him? Not yet, Chen said. Federal agents are watching him around the clock. You going anywhere near him would violate your bail conditions and give prosecutors ammunition. So I'm just supposed to, what? Wait? You're supposed to survive, Chen said. Again, like you always do. She pulled into a parking garage, took several turns that seemed designed to lose anyone following, and finally stopped in front of a nondescript building that looked like it housed offices or accountants or nothing interesting. Safe house, Chen explained, belongs to a friend who doesn't ask questions. You'll stay here until the trial. How long? Could be months, Chen admitted. Federal cases move slowly, especially when they're politically complicated. She handed Serafina a key. There's food, internet, a burner phone if you need to make calls, but Serafina? Yeah? Stay off social media. Don't read the news. Don't engage with anyone who contacts you claiming to want your story. Just exist quietly until we can figure out how to turn this disaster into something survivable. Serafina took the key. Chen? Yeah? Thank you, Serafina said. For everything, for believing me, for fighting for me, for not giving up even when I made it really hard not to. Chen's expression softened slightly.
I've been doing this job for 15 years, she said. I've seen a lot of victims, a lot of survivors, a lot of women who got chewed up by systems designed to destroy them. She paused. You're the first one I've seen fight back this hard, the first one who refused to be convenient, the first one who looked at the entire apparatus of criminal justice and said, "Fuck you, I'm telling my truth anyway." Is that a compliment or a criticism? Both, Chen said. Definitely both. She put the car in gear. I'll check on you in a few days. Until then, try not to do anything that generates more federal charges. No promises, Serafina said. Chen almost smiled. I'd be disappointed if you promised anything else. She drove away, leaving Serafina standing in front of a safe house that didn't feel safe at all, holding a key to a future she couldn't predict and couldn't control. But she was still breathing, still fighting, still refusing to disappear quietly like everyone had always wanted her to. And somewhere in a hospital room, Dorian Varelli was alive and conscious and apparently finding her catastrophic honesty amusing instead of infuriating. That had to count for something, even if she didn't know what yet. Serafina unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind her. The apartment was small, clean, impersonal. Everything a safe house should be, and nothing that felt like home. She sat on the couch and finally let herself cry. For Helena, who'd died buying her time she'd wasted. For Marco, who'd bled out believing her survival would mean something. For Vincent, whose fate she still didn't know. For Dorian, who'd nearly died protecting a principle that was now being used to imprison her. For herself, the woman who'd thought telling the truth would set her free, and instead discovered it just changed which cage she was locked in. She cried until she had nothing left. Then she stood up, washed her face, and started planning. Because if she was going to prison anyway, she was going to make sure every second of the trial counted. Every testimony, every cross-examination, every moment in front of cameras. She was going to turn her prosecution into a prosecution of the system itself. Was going to make them regret ever thinking she'd stay quiet. Was going to be so loud, so inconvenient, so impossible to ignore that even if they buried her in a cell, her voice would echo long after the door closed. Helena hadn't died so Serafina could survive quietly. Marco hadn't bled out so she could be convenient. Dorian hadn't nearly died so she could be strategic. They'd all given her the one thing the system couldn't take away, permission to be exactly as difficult as she needed to be, and she was going to use every bit of it, starting now. The trial was scheduled to begin in 48 hours. Serafina sat in the safe house at 3 a.m, unable to sleep, reading through documents Margaret Cross had provided, depositions, witness lists, evidence inventories that made her stomach turn. The prosecution's case was built on a simple narrative. She'd knowingly disclosed confidential information to sabotage federal investigations because she was in love with a criminal. The word love appeared 17 times in their filing, like it was evidence of guilt instead of just being human. Her phone buzzed. The burner Chen had given her, a text from an unknown number. You need to see something. Parking garage, level 3, 30 minutes. Come alone. Every instinct screamed trap. She went anyway. The parking garage was the kind of place where bad things happened in movies. Flickering lights, oil stains on concrete, the smell of exhaust and desperation. Serafina moved through it with keys gripped between her fingers like makeshift weapons, every shadow feeling like it held someone waiting to hurt her. Level 3 was nearly empty. One car sat in the far corner, headlights off, engine running. She approached slowly, ready to run if this turned into the ambush it probably was. The driver's door opened. Vincent stepped out. Serafina stopped breathing. He looked like hell, thinner than she remembered, face scarred from burns that must have hurt like dying, one arm in a sling, but alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. You're supposed to be dead, she whispered. I got better, Vincent said, voice rougher than it used to be. Took a while. Hurt like fuck, but I'm standing. How did you find me? Chen told me where you were, Vincent said. Figured you needed to know some things before the trial starts. What things? Vincent moved to the trunk of his car, popped it open, pulled out a laptop that looked like it had been through a war. Helena kept records, he said. Everything. Every transaction Dorian made. Every deal with the feds, every compromise he had to swallow to keep his operation running while trying to dismantle the families. He handed her the laptop. This is the truth Castellano didn't show you. The whole story. Not just the parts that make Dorian look like a calculating bastard. Serafina took the laptop with shaking hands. Why are you giving this to me? Because you're about to walk into a courtroom and let them destroy you, Vincent said flatly. Because the prosecutors are painting Dorian as a criminal who manipulated you, and you're not fighting back hard enough to call bullshit. Cross says, Shab. Cross is a good lawyer, Vincent interrupted, but she's playing defense. You need to play offense. You need to show them that Dorian wasn't using you. He was trying to protect you while burning down an empire that would have killed you the second he showed weakness. He pulled out a flash drive, pressed it into her palm. Audio recordings, he said. Every conversation Dorian had with federal agents. Every time they pushed him to move faster, sacrifice more people, compromise more principles to make their cases stronger. Every time he pushed back because it would put you at risk. Serafina stared at the flash drive like it might explode. This is evidence. This is the truth, Vincent corrected, and you're going to use it, because Helena died protecting you, and I'll be damned if her death becomes ammunition for prosecutors who don't give a fuck about justice. If I use this in court, you'll violate about 20 different laws and probably add more charges to your case, Vincent finished. But you'll also blow apart their narrative. You'll show everyone that Dorian wasn't some criminal mastermind manipulating a naive girl. He was a man trying to atone while staying alive long enough to finish what he started. They'll destroy me. They're already destroying you, Vincent said. At least this way you go down telling the truth instead of letting them write your story for you. He moved back toward his car. Vincent, he stopped, looked back. Thank you, Serafina said, for surviving, for caring, for not giving up on this even when you should have. Vincent's expression softened slightly. Dorian once told me that the only thing worth dying for is making sure the people who come after you don't have to, he said. I survived so I could help you do that. Don't waste it. He got in his car and drove away, leaving Serafina alone in a parking garage holding evidence that would either save her or bury her deeper than she already was. She had 48 hours to decide which. Margaret Cross was furious when Serafina showed her the laptop and flash drive the next morning. Where did you get these? Does it matter? It matters if they were obtained illegally, Cross said, pacing the safe house living room like a caged animal. It matters if using them means I lose my license. It matters if they give prosecutors ammunition to bury you under even more charges. But they prove Dorian was trying to protect me. They prove Dorian was negotiating with federal agents while running a criminal empire, Cross corrected, which doesn't make him noble. It makes him complicated. And juries don't like complicated. They like simple stories with clear heroes and villains. Then we make them like complicated, Serafina said. That's not how trials work. Then maybe it's time trials work differently. Cross stopped pacing, turned to look at her directly. You want to use these, she said. You want to put them into evidence, knowing it will probably result in more charges, more legal exposure, more reasons for the system to punish you for being inconvenient. Yes. Why? Because the simple story is a lie, Serafina said. Because Helena died and Marco died and Vincent nearly died and Dorian nearly died. And if I let their deaths become footnotes in some prosecutor's career advancement, then everything they fought for becomes meaningless. She stood, moved closer to Cross. You said my case could change things or destroy me trying. I choose both. I choose to tell the truth even if it costs me everything. I choose to be so loud and so inconvenient that they can't pretend I don't matter. Cross studied her for a long moment. You understand they'll come after you hard if you do this, harder than they already are. They'll paint you as a criminal, a conspirator, someone who stole confidential evidence to protect her mob boyfriend. Let them try. They'll probably succeed. Then I'll be the woman who went to prison telling the truth, instead of the woman who stayed silent, letting them lie. Cross was quiet for several seconds. Then she smiled slightly, the kind of smile that came right before doing something that would either make history or destroy a career. Fuck it, she said. Let's burn it all down. The courtroom was packed when the trial began. Every seat filled with reporters, legal observers, Representatives from the families who wanted to watch Serafina Vale finally get what she deserved. Federal prosecutors sat at one table looking confident and polished. Margaret Cross sat at the defense table looking like she'd been preparing for war instead of a trial. Serafina sat beside her wearing a suit Cross had picked out. Professional, modest, designed to make her look like a victim instead of a threat. Her hands shook in her lap. She gripped them together to keep anyone from seeing. The judge entered, an older woman with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick lawyers could pull and wasn't impressed by any of them. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison. Everyone stood. The trial began. The prosecution's opening statement was exactly what Serafina expected. They painted her as a woman who'd fallen for a criminal, who'd knowingly disclosed confidential information to protect him, who'd sabotaged federal investigations that had taken years to build. They showed photos of Dorian looking dangerous and violent. They quoted her press conference, twisting her words into evidence of guilt. Miss Vale stood before cameras and admitted she'd been shown evidence of federal cooperation that morning, the lead prosecutor said, pacing in front of the jury. Then she disclosed that information publicly, knowing it would compromise ongoing cases. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't naivety. This was a calculated choice to protect the man she loved at the expense of justice. He paused, looked directly at the jury, and that choice freed 17 human traffickers, 9 racketeers, 4 murderers. People who destroy lives for profit are walking free today because Serafina Vale decided her love for a criminal was more important than the safety of innocence. He sat down. The courtroom was silent. Then Margaret Cross stood. She didn't move toward the jury immediately, just stood there, looking at Serafina for a long moment, then at the prosecution, then at the packed gallery. "My client is many things," Cross said finally. "Difficult, inconvenient, too loud, too honest, too unwilling to disappear quietly like powerful men wanted her to." She started moving now, slowly, deliberately. But she's not a criminal. She's a survivor. A woman who was handed over to a mafia boss like garbage and expected to die. Who was protected when she should have been destroyed. Who watched people sacrifice themselves so she could keep breathing. Cross stopped in front of the prosecution's table. "The prosecution wants you to believe she sabotaged investigations out of love. But love requires knowledge. It requires understanding. It requires awareness of consequences." She turned to face the jury. Serafina Vale had none of those things. What she had was a lawyer from the Castellano family showing her documents and telling her they proved Dorian Varelli was using her. What she had was panic and confusion and the weight of watching good people die. What she had was a press conference where she tried to make sense of contradictions she didn't understand. Cross moved back toward the defense table. "Over the next few days, we're going to show you the truth. Not the simple story the prosecution wants. The complicated, messy, difficult truth about what happens when someone tries to survive a system designed to destroy them." She looked at Serafina. "And we're going to show you that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay quiet. Even when staying quiet would be safer. Even when speaking up cost you everything." She sat down. Serafina felt tears burning but refused to let them fall. The judge looked at the prosecution. "Call your first witness." Nichet. The prosecution's case was brutal and efficient. They called federal agents who testified about the investigation Dorian had been cooperating with. They showed timelines proving Serafina had been shown the documents before her press conference. They played clips of her statement where she'd mentioned federal cooperation, highlighting every word that had given defense attorneys ammunition. They made her sound guilty, made her sound calculated, made her sound like someone who'd known exactly what she was doing and done it anyway. Cross fought back during cross-examination, but the damage was done. The jury looked at Serafina like she was exactly what the prosecution said she was, a woman in love who'd destroyed justice to protect a criminal. On the third day, the prosecution rested. Margaret Cross stood. "The defense calls Vincent Moretti." The courtroom erupted. Vincent Moretti was supposed to be dead, was supposed to have died in the fire at the Varelli mansion. The prosecution half stood, shouting objections about witness lists and proper notice. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. "Approach," she said. Both legal teams went to the bench for a sidebar that involved a lot of heated whispering and angry gestures. Finally, they returned. "I'm allowing the witness," Morrison said. "But, counselor, If this is a stunt, it will be the last one you pull in my courtroom. Understood, Your Honor, Cross said. Vincent entered through the back doors, still wearing his sling, scars visible on his face even from across the room. He walked to the witness stand slowly, like every step hurt, and was sworn in. Cross approached him. Mr. Moretti, please state your occupation for the record. I was head of security for Dorian Varelli, Vincent said, voice rough but clear. And you were present the night of the attack on the Varelli estate? I was. Can you describe what happened that night? Vincent looked directly at the jury. We were attacked by combined forces from the Castellano, Rossi, and Moretti families. They came to kill everyone inside, specifically targeting Serafina Vale. We fought back. A lot of people died. Why were they targeting Miss Vale? The prosecution stood. Objection, speculation. I'll allow it, Morrison said. The witness was present for relevant conversations. He can testify to what he heard. Cross nodded. Mr. Moretti? They were targeting her because Dorian had refused to kill her, Vincent said. Because he'd protected her instead of making her disappear. Because he'd drawn a line and said women weren't disposable, and that line threatened their entire way of doing business. And Miss Vale's role that night? She tried to escape like we told her to, Vincent said. Then came back because Helena was dying, then got dragged out by Marco while the rest of us held the line. Did she participate in the violence? No. Did she have knowledge of Dorian's cooperation with federal agents? No, Vincent said firmly. None of us knew. Dorian kept that information locked down tight because he knew if word got out, we'd all be targets. Cross pulled out documents. I'm entering into evidence a series of recordings obtained from Helena Davies' personal files. These recordings document conversations between Dorian Varelli and federal agents. The prosecution exploded. Your Honor, these recordings weren't on the witness list because they weren't obtained until after the trial started, Cross interrupted, and they're directly relevant to whether my client had knowledge of the investigation. Morrison looked at the documents. I'll hear them in chambers first, she said. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. She banged the gavel. That night, Serafina sat in the safe house watching news coverage of the trial. Defense attorney Margaret Cross dropped a bombshell today by calling Vincent Moretti, a man presumed dead, and attempting to introduce recordings allegedly proving Dorian Varelli was cooperating with federal authorities. Legal experts say the recordings, if authentic, could change the entire trajectory of the case. Could. But questions remain about how the defense obtained them and whether they were acquired legally. Her phone buzzed. Detective Chen. You're either a genius or you just committed career suicide, possibly both. Serafina texted back. Seems to be my specialty. The recordings are real, Chen sent. I verified them. But you need to prepare yourself for the prosecution to come after you hard tomorrow. They're going to argue you stole evidence, tampered with an investigation, conspired with Vincent to manufacture a defense. Let them. Serafina, I mean it. Let them come after me. Let them show everyone exactly what they do to women who refuse to stay quiet. Her phone rang, Chen calling instead of texting. Serafina answered. You can't martyr yourself, Chen said without preamble. This isn't about making a point. This is about staying out of prison. Maybe it's about both. No, Chen said firmly. It's about surviving. It's about living long enough to actually change things instead of becoming another cautionary tale. Helena didn't die so I could survive quietly. Helena died so you could survive at all, Chen corrected. There's a difference between being brave and being self-destructive. Figure out which one you're doing before it's too late. She hung up. Serafina sat in the darkness, holding a phone that felt heavier than it should, wondering if Chen was right, wondering if she'd crossed the line from courage into suicide, wondering if there was even a line anymore or if she'd erased it completely by refusing to play by rules designed to destroy her. Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. You're making a mistake. Drop the recordings and we can make this go away. Keep pushing and you'll lose everything. She stared at the message, deleted it, went to bed knowing tomorrow would either vindicate every choice she'd made or bury her so deep she'd never see daylight again. Talk. Judge Morrison's chambers smelled like old books and coffee that had been sitting too long. Both legal teams sat across from each other while Morrison listened to the recordings Vincent had provided. Her expression gave away nothing, but her pen tapped against the desk in a rhythm that suggested she was either deeply troubled or deeply annoyed. The recordings were devastating. Dorian's voice, explaining to federal agents why he couldn't move faster without putting Serafina at risk. Agents pushing him to sacrifice her safety for better evidence. Dorian refusing. Arguments about priorities, about acceptable losses, about whether one woman's life was worth compromising investigations that could save hundreds. She's not acceptable loss, Dorian's voice said on one recording, static crackling through the anger. You want my cooperation? Fine. You want my territory? Fine. You want names and evidence and everything I've built? I'll give it to you, but you don't get to decide she's expendable. The agent's response: if we can't guarantee her safety, we need you to remove her from the situation. Remove her how? Dorian's voice, colder now. However necessary. Long silence. We're done here, Dorian said. Find another informant. The recording ended. Morrison set down her pen. These are authenticated? She asked Cross. Yes, Your Honor. We have the original files and multiple experts willing to testify to their validity. Morrison looked at the prosecution. Your response? The lead prosecutor looked like he'd swallowed something poisonous. Your Honor, regardless of these recordings' content, they were obtained through illegal means. Helena Davies had no authority to record federal agents. Using these recordings violates wiretapping laws, and Helena Davies was Dorian Varelli's employee, Cross interrupted. She was recording conversations her employer was part of for business purposes. That's legal in this state with single-party consent. She's dead, the prosecutor said. She can't testify to her intent. Her intent is documented in her personal files, Cross said, pulling out more papers. Written instructions to maintain audio records of all federal negotiations to protect against potential bad faith prosecution, which, given that you're currently trying to imprison a woman for doing exactly what you wanted Dorian to do, sacrifice Serafina for your investigations, seems prescient. The prosecutor's face turned red. Morrison held up a hand. Enough, she said. I'm allowing the recordings. They're directly relevant to whether Miss Vale had knowledge of the investigation and whether her disclosure was knowing and intentional. Your Honor, my decision is final, Morrison said. And Counselor? She looked at the prosecutor. The next time you push for charges against someone while simultaneously having pressured the very person they're accused of protecting to sacrifice that same person's safety, expect judicial scrutiny. This stinks of retaliation. The prosecutor stood. With all due respect, Your Honor, you can save your respect for someone who wants it, Morrison said. Court reconvenes in 1 hour, and I suggest you start thinking very carefully about whether this case should proceed at all. The courtroom was electric when they returned. Word had spread that something significant had happened in chambers. Reporters leaned forward in their seats. The jury looked confused but alert. The family's representatives whispered among themselves with expressions that ranged from fury to concern. Serafina sat at the defense table, hands steady now, watching as Margaret Cross prepared to play the recordings for everyone. The prosecution looked like they were attending their own funeral. The defense recalls Vincent Moretti, Cross said. Vincent returned to the stand, still wearing that same expression of someone who'd survived worse than a courtroom could threaten. Cross played the recordings. Every word echoed through the courtroom with brutal clarity. Dorian refusing to sacrifice Serafina. Federal agents pushing him to prioritize their investigations over her safety. Arguments about acceptable losses and whether one woman's life mattered more than potential convictions. The jury's expressions changed, shifted from skeptical to troubled to something that looked like anger. When the recordings finished, Cross approached Vincent again. Did Miss Vale have access to these recordings before her press conference? No. Did she have knowledge that Dorian was cooperating with federal authorities? Not from him, Vincent said. Not from any of us. The first she heard about it was when Castellano's lawyer showed her documents specifically designed to make her think Dorian was using her. And her press conference? Was her trying to make sense of information she didn't understand, Vincent said. Trying to tell a truth that was more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. Cross nodded. No further questions. The prosecutor stood for cross-examination, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. He asked a few perfunctory questions about Vincent's criminal history, about his loyalty to Dorian, about whether he had any proof the recordings hadn't been doctored. Vincent answered everything calmly, without defensiveness, with the kind of straightforward honesty that made him more credible than any polished testimony could have been. Finally, the prosecutor sat down. The defense calls Serafina Vale. The courtroom went silent. Serafina stood, legs steadier than she'd expected, and walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, sat down facing a courtroom full of people who'd already decided who she was. Margaret Cross approached. "Miss Vale, let's start at the beginning. How did you end up at the Varelli estate?" And Serafina told her story. Not the sanitized version, not the strategic version. The raw, honest truth about being handed over like garbage, about expecting death, about finding protection from the man everyone said would destroy her. She told them about Helena's kindness and Marco's sacrifice and Vincent's loyalty. She told them about watching people die so she could keep breathing. She told them about the lawyer showing her documents, about her confusion and panic, about standing at a podium trying to make sense of contradictions that seemed impossible. "I didn't know I was disclosing confidential information," she said, voice steady. "I thought I was telling the truth about being used. I thought I was exposing how even protection can be a kind of manipulation. I was wrong, but being wrong isn't the same as being criminal." She looked at the jury. "I survived a system designed to destroy me. I watched good people die, protecting a principle that shouldn't have needed protecting. And when I tried to make their deaths mean something by telling the truth, I got arrested for it." She paused. "So you can convict me if you want. You can decide that surviving loudly is a crime. You can decide that women who refuse to disappear deserve to be punished. But if you do that, you're proving exactly what I've been saying all along, that this system protects powerful men and punishes inconvenient women. And no amount of legal procedure changes that." Cross smiled slightly. No further questions. The prosecutor approached for cross-examination, and Serafina braced herself for the attack she knew was coming. "Miss Vale, you claim you didn't know you were disclosing confidential information, but you admitted in your press conference that you'd been shown evidence that morning. You knew information about federal cooperation existed. You chose to disclose it publicly anyway. That's not ignorance. That's a choice." "It was a choice to tell the truth," Serafina said. "A truth that freed 17 human traffickers. A truth that exposed how the system was willing to sacrifice me for convictions." "You're not the victim here," the prosecutor said, voice harder now. "The victims are the women who'll be trafficked because you decided your feelings were more important than justice." Serafina felt anger flash through her. "My feelings?" she said, voice rising. "You think this is about feelings? Helena died with her chest torn open by bullets. Marco bled out in a parking lot. Vincent's face is covered in burn scars. And you're standing here telling me my feelings are the problem?" "Miss Vale—" "No," she interrupted, standing now even though she wasn't supposed to. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to reduce everything they sacrificed to feelings. They died fighting a system that treats women as disposable. And you're proving them right by putting me on trial for refusing to be disposed of quietly." "Your Honor," the prosecutor said. But Morrison was watching Serafina with an expression that was impossible to read. "Miss Vale, please sit down," she said, but her voice wasn't harsh. "And Counselor, I think you've made your point. Unless you have actual questions instead of speeches." The prosecutor's jaw tightened. No further questions. Serafina sat back down, heart hammering, knowing she'd just either won her case or destroyed it completely. Cross approached for redirect. "Miss Vale, one final question. If you could go back to that press conference, knowing what you know now, would you change what you said?" Serafina didn't hesitate. "No," she said, "because telling uncomfortable truths is more important than protecting comfortable lies. Because every woman who's ever been told to stay quiet needs to see someone refuse. Because Helena and Marco didn't die so I could be convenient." She looked at the prosecutor. "They died so I could be free. And freedom means telling the truth, even when it costs you everything." Cross nodded. "Nothing further, Your Honor." Closing arguments happened the next day. The prosecution painted Serafina as a woman who'd let emotion override judgment, who'd sabotaged justice out of misplaced loyalty, who needed to be held accountable for the consequences of her choices. Margaret Cross painted her as a survivor who'd been weaponized by systems that wanted to silence her, who'd told difficult truths in a world that punished difficulty, who represented every woman who'd ever been told her survival was less important than powerful men's comfort.
You have a choice, Cross told the jury. You can decide that Serafina Vale is guilty of being inconvenient, of being loud, of refusing to disappear. Or you can decide that surviving loudly isn't a crime, it's resistance. And resistance is the only thing that ever changes systems designed to destroy people. She sat down. The judge gave the jury their instructions. They filed out to deliberate.
And Serafina sat in the courtroom, surrounded by reporters and lawyers, and people who'd decided her fate before hearing a word of testimony and waited to see if telling the truth had been worth it. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Serafina spent them in the safe house, unable to eat or sleep or think about anything except those 12 people deciding whether she'd spend the next decade in prison. Detective Chen visited once, brought food she didn't eat. Whatever happens, Chen said, you fought. You told your truth. You refused to be convenient. That counts for something. Does it count enough to keep me out of prison?
I don't know, Chen admitted. But it counts enough that every woman watching this trial knows someone fought back. That's not nothing. On the third day, at 4 p.m, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was even more packed than before. Every seat filled, cameras everywhere. The family's representatives sitting in the same front row seats, expressions ranging from anticipation to anxiety. Federal prosecutors looking simultaneously confident and uncertain. Margaret Cross sat beside Serafina, hand on her shoulder. No matter what happens, Cross said quietly, you did something extraordinary here. You told a truth nobody wanted to hear and made them listen anyway. Will that matter if they convict me? It'll matter regardless, Cross said, because truth always matters eventually, even when it costs everything in the moment. The jury filed in. None of them looked at Serafina, which she'd heard meant guilty but hoped meant nothing. Judge Morrison entered. All rise. Everyone stood. Please be seated, Morrison said. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a serious expression. We have, Your Honor. Please hand it to the bailiff. The bailiff carried the verdict form to Morrison, who read it with no visible reaction, then handed it back. Will the defendant please rise? Serafina stood. Her legs barely held her. Cross stood beside her, solid and steady. On the charge of obstruction of justice, how do you find? The foreperson looked directly at Serafina for the first time. We find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted, shouting from the gallery. The prosecution team looking stunned. Margaret Cross gripping Serafina's hand so hard it hurt. Morrison banged her gavel repeatedly. Order! I will have order in this court. The noise settled slowly. On the charge of conspiracy to interfere with a federal investigation, how do you find? We find the defendant not guilty. More shouting, more gavel banging, more chaos that felt like the world tilting sideways. Morrison waited for silence. Miss Vale, you're free to go. This court is adjourned. Final gavel bang. And then Margaret Cross was hugging her and Detective Chen was pushing through the crowd, and reporters were shouting questions and someone was crying. Maybe Serafina herself, she couldn't tell anymore. She'd won. Against every expectation, against all the power arrayed against her, against a system designed to punish inconvenience, she'd won. Not because she'd been strategic, not because she'd been convenient, because she'd told the truth and refused to stop telling it until someone listened. Outside the courthouse, cameras surrounded her immediately. Questions shouted from every direction, microphones shoved in her face, the world wanting to know what came next. Serafina stood on the steps and looked at all of them, the reporters and observers and people who'd spent weeks deciding who she was without asking. I have one thing to say, she told them. To every woman who's ever been told to disappear quietly, to every person who's been treated as disposable, to everyone who's been punished for surviving loudly instead of dying politely. She paused, letting the cameras focus, letting the moment crystallize. You matter. Your voice matters. Your survival matters. And anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to protect a system that benefits from your silence. She started walking down the steps. Miss Vale, a reporter shouted.
What about Dorian Varelli? Will you be seeing him? Serafina stopped, turned back. That's between me and him, she said. But I'll tell you this. He nearly died protecting a principle that this trial proved was worth protecting. And whether you think he's a monster or a man trying to be better, he changed something. He drew a line. And because of that line, I'm standing here free instead of buried somewhere nobody would find me. She walked away then, through the crowd, toward Detective Chen's car where safety and uncertainty waited in equal measure. Behind her, the courthouse stood like a monument to systems that protected power and punished resistance. But today, for once, resistance had won, and that had to count for something. Even if Serafina didn't know what yet. The days after the verdict felt like living in someone else's life. Serafina stayed in the safe house while the media circus continued outside. News vans parked on corners, reporters calling the burner phone number somehow, social media exploding with opinions about whether she was a hero or a fraud or something more complicated than either label allowed. Margaret Cross had warned her this would happen, that winning the trial just meant becoming a different kind of target. She wasn't wrong. Detective Chen visited on the third day carrying groceries and news that felt heavier than the bags. Dorian's being released from the hospital tomorrow, Chen said, unpacking food into the refrigerator. He's still facing charges. A lot of them. But his cooperation deal is back on the table after your trial exposed how the prosecutors tried to manipulate the investigation. Serafina sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Has he asked about me? Every day, Chen said. But I told him you needed space to figure out what comes next. What does come next? Chen stopped unpacking, turned to look at her directly. That's up to you, she said. You could disappear, change your name, move somewhere nobody knows your face. Live the quiet life they never let you have. Or you could stay loud, Chen said. Use the platform you've built. Tell more stories. Help more people survive systems designed to destroy them. What do you think I should do? Chen smiled slightly. I think you're going to do whatever the hell you want regardless of what anyone thinks, she said. Because that's who you are. That's who you've always been. She finished with the groceries, grabbed her keys. For what it's worth, Chen said from the doorway, I'm glad you exist. I'm glad you fought. I'm glad you won. And whatever you decide next, I hope it's exactly as loud and inconvenient as you want it to be. She left, and Serafina sat alone with choices that felt both limitless and terrifying simultaneously. She went to see Dorian on the day he was released. Not to the hospital. He was being transferred directly to a federal facility pending trial. But Margaret Cross had pulled strings, called in favors, arranged for 20 minutes in a room with guards watching through glass and recording equipment capturing every word. Serafina sat on one side of a metal table scarred with initials and threats carved by people who'd sat there before. Waited. Tried to prepare herself for seeing him again after everything that had happened. The door opened. Dorian walked in wearing prison scrubs that didn't fit right, his movements still careful like his body hadn't fully healed yet. The bruises had faded, but scars remained, visible ones on his face and neck, invisible ones behind his eyes that looked older than they had months ago. He sat down across from her. They stared at each other for a long moment, neither speaking. Finally, Dorian broke the silence. You won. We won, Serafina corrected. No, he said. You won. I just survived long enough to watch it happen. His voice was rougher than she remembered, damaged by smoke inhalation that hadn't fully healed. How are you? She asked, then immediately felt stupid because the answer was obvious. He was sitting in a federal detention facility wearing prison scrubs while facing charges that would probably keep him locked up for the rest of his life. I'm alive, Dorian said, which is more than I expected when those families came through my door. Vincent said you were working with federal agents. I was. For how long? 2 years, Dorian admitted, since they threatened to charge me with racketeering and I realized I could either go to prison or help them dismantle the families while staying operational long enough to finish what I'd started. Which was? He looked at her directly, those dark eyes carrying the weight of decisions that had cost too many lives. Changing the rules, he said. Making it so the next woman who got handed over like garbage would have somewhere safe to go, making it so the next scared kid being trafficked had a chance at escape, making it so my empire, brutal and violent as it was, could become slightly less monstrous than the alternatives. And me? Serafina asked. Where did I fit into that? You were never part of the deal, Dorian said. You were the moment where I had to decide if my cooperation with the feds meant anything or if it was just another compromise with violence. He leaned forward slightly. They wanted me to make you disappear. Said you were too visible, too complicated, too much of a liability. Said if I really wanted to help them take down the families, I needed to solve the problem you represented. And you refused. I refused, he confirmed, because the moment I accepted that logic, that your life was negotiable for convictions, I became exactly what I was trying to stop being. Serafina felt tears burning. People died because of that choice.
People die every day, Dorian said quietly. Helena, Marco, Vincent almost, me almost, a lot of others whose names you never learned. He paused. But more people are alive because I drew that line. The 16-year-old girl who didn't get sold to pay off gambling debts. The women who aren't being trafficked through my territory anymore. The families who aren't profiting off human misery because I burned their routes while gathering evidence. That doesn't make the deaths less real. No, Dorian agreed. It doesn't. But it makes them mean something. There's a difference between dying for cruelty and dying to end it. The same thing Helena had said. The same thing Vincent had implied. The same logic that had carried Serafina through testimony and trial and the aftermath of choices that had cost everything. I don't know if I forgive you, she said quietly, for cooperating with the feds, for not telling me, for making decisions about my life without asking me. I don't expect you to, Dorian said. I made choices that protected you while also using you as cover. Both things are true. Both things matter. And I don't get to decide which one you focus on. But I'd do it again, he said, voice firm now. Because you're alive. Because you stood in a courtroom and told a truth nobody wanted to hear. Because every woman watching that trial saw someone refuse to be convenient. That's worth more than my redemption. Worth more than my soul. Worth more than whether you forgive me or not. Serafina stared at him across the scarred metal table. This man who'd nearly died protecting her while simultaneously using her for purposes he'd never disclosed, trying to reconcile contradictions that refused to be reconciled. What happens to you now? She asked. Trial, Dorian said. Probably conviction on most charges. The cooperation deal will reduce my sentence, but I'm looking at 20 years minimum, more likely 30. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said. I built an empire on violence. I killed people. I profited from suffering even while trying to reduce it. Prison is probably less than I deserve. That's not... It is, Dorian interrupted. And pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone. I'm not a good man, Serafina. I'm just a man who tried to be slightly less bad. And trying doesn't erase what I've done. It just means I recognized it was wrong. A guard knocked on the glass, 5 minutes remaining. Dorian stood slowly. I need to tell you something, he said, before they take me back. What? The families are still out there, weakened, fractured, under investigation, but not gone. And some of them are going to blame you for everything they've lost. I know. You need to be careful, Dorian said urgently. You need to watch your back. You need to not assume that winning your trial means you're safe. I'm tired of being careful, Serafina said, standing to face him. I'm tired of living like prey. I'm tired of measuring my survival by how invisible I can make myself. Then be loud, Dorian said, but be smart about it. Use the platform you've built. Tell the stories that need telling. Help people survive, but don't make yourself an easy target. The guard opened the door. Time was up. Dorian moved toward it, then stopped, looked back at her one more time. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For being worth it, he said. For proving that choosing principles over pragmatism can actually mean something. For surviving loudly enough that everyone who told you to disappear had to watch you refuse. He left before she could respond. The door closed. The lock clicked. And Serafina stood alone in a room designed for goodbyes, trying to figure out what came next now that the man who'd protected her was going to prison for the next 30 years. Behat.
She gave her first interview 3 weeks later. Not to a major news network. They'd all wanted exclusives, offered money, promised sympathetic coverage if she'd just tell them the story they wanted to hear. She chose a small independent journalist who'd been covering criminal justice reform for years, someone who understood that truth was more important than ratings. They met in a coffee shop in a neighborhood nobody would expect, recording equipment set up at a corner table while other patrons tried not to stare. "Let's start at the beginning," the journalist said. Her name was Sarah Kim, and she had the kind of eyes that suggested she'd heard every story and believed none of them until proven otherwise. "How did you end up at the Varelli estate?" And Serafina told her everything. Not the sanitized version, not the strategic version, the raw truth about being discarded, about expecting death, about finding protection that came with complications she hadn't understood until much later. She told her about Helena's sacrifice and Marco's death and Vincent's survival. She told her about the trial and the verdict and the impossible choice between staying quiet safely or speaking up dangerously. "What do you want people to understand about your story?" Sarah asked. Serafina thought about that for a long moment. "I want them to understand that survival isn't clean," she said finally. "That being saved doesn't mean being innocent. That the people who protect you can also be using you. That gratitude and anger can coexist. That redemption is messy and incomplete, and never as simple as we want it to be." She paused. "I want women who've been told they're too difficult, too loud, too much trouble to know that those qualities aren't flaws. They're survival mechanisms. They're resistance. And anyone who can't handle them is trying to make you smaller so they feel bigger." "What about Dorian Varelli? What about him? Do you love him?" Serafina smiled without humor. "I don't know," she admitted. "I love what he represented. The idea that even monsters can try to be better. The proof that principles can matter more than survival. But do I love him, the actual man? The criminal who built an empire on violence?" She shook her head. "I don't know if love is the right word for what I feel. Gratitude? Yes. Respect for his choices, maybe. But love requires trust, and I don't know if I trust that his protection wasn't also manipulation. I don't know if those two things can be separated or if they're permanently entangled." "And you're comfortable with that uncertainty?" "I have to be," Serafina said, "because certainty is a luxury I can't afford anymore. The only thing I know for sure is that I'm alive and free and capable of telling my story. Everything else is complicated." The interview ran in full, unedited, and went viral within hours. Social media exploded with responses. Some people called her brave, others called her ungrateful. Some said she was perpetuating victim culture. Others said she was the most honest voice they'd heard in years. Serafina read none of it. Instead, she started writing. The book took 6 months. She wrote it in the safe house initially, then in a small apartment Detective Chen helped her find in a neighborhood where nobody recognized her face. She wrote about being handed over like garbage, about Helena and Marco and Vincent, about Dorian's complicated protection, about the trial and the verdict and everything that came after. But she also wrote about the other women, the ones who'd been saved from trafficking routes, the 16-year-old girl who didn't get sold, the survivors who'd reached out after her trial to say thank you for refusing to stay quiet. She wrote about systems that protected power and punished resistance, about how survival required being difficult, about how redemption was possible even in places where it shouldn't be. Publishers fought over the manuscript, offered 6 figures, 7 figures, promised bestseller lists and media tours and all the attention she'd never wanted. She chose the smallest publisher who made the smallest offer but promised the most honesty. "I don't want this to be a redemption story," she told them. "I don't want it to be inspiration porn. I want it to be the truth about surviving systems designed to destroy you, even when that truth is ugly and complicated and doesn't fit into neat categories." They agreed. The book released 8 months after the trial ended. It became a bestseller within 2 weeks. Not because it was easy or comfortable or inspiring in simple ways, because it was honest in ways most memoirs weren't. Because Serafina refused to make herself more palatable for readers who wanted clear heroes and obvious villains. She gave exactly 3 interviews promoting it, refused all television appearances, turned down speaking engagements offering 5-figure fees, stayed as invisible as possible while her words became impossible to ignore. The families noticed. The first threat came via email to her publisher. Tell Serafina Vale to stop talking or we'll make her stop permanently. The second came through her literary agent, a package containing photos of her leaving her apartment, buying groceries, meeting friends for coffee. Surveillance photos proving they knew exactly where she was. The third was a brick through her apartment window with a note attached, "Disappear or we'll make you." Detective Chen showed up within an hour of the brick, looking furious and concerned in equal measure. "You need protection," Chen said. "I need to not live in fear," Serafina corrected. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "They are when protection means hiding," Serafina said. "They are when safety means being quiet. They are when survival means making myself invisible again." "They will kill you," Chen said bluntly. "The families you helped destroy, the men facing prison because of your testimony, the people who've lost money and power and reputation because you refuse to stay silent, they will kill you if they get the chance." "Then I'll die loud," Serafina said. "That's not brave. That's stupid." "Maybe," Serafina agreed. "But I didn't survive everything I survived just to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I didn't watch Helena die and Marco bleed out and Dorian go to prison so I could hide." Chen grabbed her shoulders, forced her to meet her eyes. "Listen to me," she said. "I've seen what these people do to women who threaten them. I've seen bodies that were barely recognizable. I've seen crime scenes that gave experienced detectives nightmares. And I will not let that happen to you. You can't protect me forever." "I can protect you long enough for the investigations to finish," Chen said. "Long enough for more families to fall. Long enough for the men threatening you to be in prison themselves." "How long is that?" "I don't know," Chen admitted. "But I know you're not doing anyone any good dead. I know Helena didn't die so you could become a martyr. And I know that survival sometimes means accepting help even when independence feels more authentic." Serafina was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of protection are we talking about?" "Federal witness protection if you want it," Chen said, "or private security if you'd rather stay visible. Or somewhere in between. I'm not disappearing again." "Then we make you harder to kill," Chen said. "We add security, we change your patterns, we make sure you're not an easy target." She released Serafina's shoulders. "But you have to let me help you. You have to stop acting like survival is a solo sport." Serafina looked at the brick lying on her floor, glass scattered around it, like evidence of violence that hadn't quite happened yet. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'm not stopping. I'm not being quiet. I'm not making myself convenient." "I wouldn't expect anything else," Chen said. The security team Chen arranged was efficient and invisible. They didn't follow Serafina, obviously, or make her feel like a prisoner. Just stayed close enough to intercept threats before they materialized. Changed her routines enough to make targeting her difficult. Added layers of protection she mostly didn't notice. Life continued. She did interviews about the book. Spoke at a few carefully selected events about criminal justice reform. Started a foundation with book proceeds to help women escaping trafficking situations. Stayed as loud and inconvenient as possible while accepting that staying alive required compromise. 6 months after the book released, Vincent visited her apartment. He looked better. The burn scars had healed into something less raw, his arm no longer in a sling. But he still carried himself like someone who'd been through war and come back different. "I'm leaving the city," he said without preamble. "Where are you going?" "Somewhere nobody knows my face," Vincent said. "Somewhere I can be someone other than Dorian Varelli's security chief." "Do you know who that someone is?" Vincent smiled slightly. "Not yet," he admitted, "but I figure I've got time to find out." He pulled an envelope from his jacket, handed it to her. "What's this?" "Letter from Dorian," Vincent said. "He's not allowed direct contact with you because of his cooperation deal, but he wanted you to have this." Serafina took the envelope with hands that shook slightly. "How is he?" "Surviving," Vincent said. "Learning to be a person instead of a king. Trying to figure out what redemption looks like when you're locked in a cage for the next 30 years. "Does he regret it?" "Protecting you?" Vincent shook his head. "Not once. Everything else, maybe. The people who died. The compromises he made. The empire he built. But protecting you? He'd do it again tomorrow." He moved toward the door. "Vincent?" He stopped, looked back. "Thank you," Serafina said, "for surviving,
for helping me survive, for being part of something that probably shouldn't have meant as much as it did. It meant exactly as much as it needed to, Vincent said. And I'm glad I was there for it, even the parts that hurt. He left, and Serafina sat alone with an envelope containing words from a man serving 30 years for crimes he committed while trying to be slightly less monstrous than the alternatives. She opened it slowly.
The letter was written in careful handwriting on prison stationery that looked thin and cheap. Serafina, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you want to hear from me, but there are things I need to say, and prison is nothing if not time to think about everything you should have said before. Thank you. For fighting, for surviving, for refusing to make yourself smaller so other people could feel bigger. For proving that my choice to protect you meant something beyond just my ego or my redemption arc. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I made decisions that cost lives. I built an empire on violence even while trying to reduce that violence. I cooperated with federal investigations while not telling you I was doing it. All of that is true. All of that matters. But I need you to know that protecting you was never manipulation. It was never strategy. It was the moment where I had to decide if my principles meant anything or if they were just convenient morality I used to feel better about being a monster. You were never bait, never a cover story, never anything less than proof that choosing differently is possible even in places where it shouldn't be. The families are weakened but not destroyed. Be careful. Be smart. Be as loud as you want, but don't make yourself an easy target. Live the life they never let you have. Be difficult. Be too much. Be everything they said you couldn't be. And know that 30 years in prison is worth it if it means you're free. D. Serafina read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully, put it in a drawer with other things she needed to keep but didn't know what to do with, and went back to living. 2 years after the trial, Serafina stood on a stage in front of 500 people attending a criminal justice reform conference. Her security team was scattered through the audience, invisible but present. Detective Chen sat in the 3rd row, watching with an expression that might have been pride. Margaret Cross was in the back, probably ready to file motions if anything went wrong. Serafina gripped the podium edges and looked out at faces waiting to hear whatever wisdom she'd allegedly gained from surviving systems designed to destroy her. I'm going to tell you something unpopular, she started. Survival isn't noble. It isn't inspiring. It isn't a lesson or a metaphor or a teaching moment. She paused. Let that sink in. Survival is messy. It's complicated. It involves making choices that compromise your principles. It means accepting help from people who are also using you. It means being grateful and angry simultaneously. It means living with contradictions that never resolve. Someone in the audience shifted uncomfortably. I survived because a mafia boss chose to protect me. A violent criminal who'd killed people and built an empire on suffering looked at me and decided I was worth fighting for. And that protection saved my life while also serving purposes I didn't understand until much later. She looked directly at the audience. Both things are true. The protection was real. The manipulation was real. The gratitude I feel is real. The anger I feel is real. And anyone who tells you that you have to choose one truth over the other is trying to make you smaller so they feel more comfortable. She released the podium, started pacing slightly. People want simple stories. They want clear heroes and obvious villains. They want redemption arcs that are clean and complete. They want victims who are innocent and perpetrators who are purely evil. But that's not how people work. That's not how systems work. That's not how survival works. She stopped pacing, faced them again. Dorian Varelli is serving 30 years for crimes he committed. He's also the reason I'm alive. He's also the reason 16 women weren't trafficked. He's also the reason trafficking routes through an entire city were dismantled. He's also a violent criminal who built an empire on fear. All of those things are true. All of those things matter. And pretending we have to choose which truth is more important doesn't help anyone. It just makes us feel better about being unable to hold complexity. She felt her voice strengthening. So if you came here wanting me to tell you that survival makes you noble, I can't do that. If you came here wanting me to reduce my story to inspiration porn, that's not happening. If you came here wanting simple answers about how to fix broken systems, I don't have them. What I have is this. I survived. Messily. Imperfectly. With help from people who were also harming me.
with choices that compromised my principles while saving my life, with gratitude for protection that was also manipulation. She looked at Chen, then at Cross, then back at the audience.
And I'm here. I'm loud. I'm inconvenient. I'm too much trouble. I'm everything they said I couldn't be. And that's worth more than simple stories or clean redemption or any narrative that makes survival easier to digest. She stepped back from the podium. Thank you for listening. And if you're someone who's been told to disappear quietly, don't be loud, be difficult, be impossible to ignore, because your survival matters more than anyone's comfort, including mine. The applause started slowly, then built into something that felt like recognition instead of just politeness. Serafina left the stage and went back to living the complicated, messy life Helena and Marco had died for her to have. 5 years after the trial, Serafina received word that Dorian's sentence had been reduced. Not by much. He was still looking at 15 more years minimum, but the cooperation he'd provided had resulted in convictions that dismantled 3 major trafficking operations. The judge had recognized that his crimes, while serious, had ultimately served to reduce violence rather than increase it. 15 years instead of 30. Still most of his life. Still a cage. But something. Serafina requested a visit. The prison was 3 states away, in a facility designed for federal inmates serving long sentences. She went through security, surrendered her phone and belongings, sat in a visitation room that smelled like industrial cleaner and contained hope. Dorian entered looking older, hair graying at the temples, lines deeper around his eyes, body thinner from prison food and limited exercise. But his posture was still upright, his gaze still sharp. The man was still visible beneath the prisoner. They sat across from each other at a table scarred with more initials than the first one had been. "You came," he said. "I came." "Why?" Serafina thought about that. "Because I needed to see you," she said finally. "Not the idea of you. Not the monster or the protector or the complicated man who saved me while using me. Just you, the actual person. So I could figure out what I actually feel instead of what I think I'm supposed to feel." And I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I'm working on it." They talked for the full hour aloud, about his life in prison, about her foundation, about the families that were still being dismantled piece by piece, about Vincent, who'd sent a postcard from somewhere in Montana saying he'd found work as a carpenter and was learning to be someone new, about the world that kept turning despite everything that had happened. At the end, Dorian asked the question Serafina had been waiting for. "Do you forgive me?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I forgive you for protecting me," she said. "I forgive you for drawing lines that cost lives while saving others. I forgive you for being complicated in ways that don't fit into clean categories." She paused. "But I don't forgive you for not telling me about the federal cooperation, for making decisions about my life without asking me, for using me as cover, even if the protection was real." "That's fair," Dorian said. "Both things are true," Serafina continued. "I'm grateful and angry, indebted and betrayed, forever changed by your choice to protect me, and forever complicated by the fact that protection served multiple purposes." She looked at him directly. "And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with holding contradictions. I'm okay with being grateful to someone I don't fully forgive, because people are complicated and survival is messy, and trying to force either into simplicity just makes us smaller." Dorian smiled slightly, the first real smile she'd seen from him since before the attack. "You've become exactly what they were terrified you'd be," he said. "What's that?" "Someone who refuses to be convenient," Dorian said. "Someone who survives loudly. Someone who proves that the system can be fought even when it seems impossible." "Is that enough?" "It's everything," Dorian said quietly. "It's the only thing that ever matters." A guard announced time was up. Serafina stood, hesitated, then moved around the table to hug him once, quick and careful, watched by guards who didn't stop her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being worth the complication." "Thank you," Dorian replied, "for being worth 30 years." She left him sitting in a prison visitation room and went back to her life. Complicated, messy, loud, and entirely her own. 10 years after being dragged through rain to the Betrayal estate expecting death, Serafina Vale stood on the steps of a community center her foundation had opened, It was in the neighborhood where she'd grown up, in a building that used to be abandoned but was now full of resources for women escaping violence. Counseling services, legal aid, job training, safe housing, everything she'd needed when she was younger and had nowhere to go. The crowd gathered for the opening was smaller than the trial audience had been, but felt more significant somehow. Real people who'd been helped by her foundation, women who'd survived trafficking, girls who'd been told they were too difficult and had learned that difficulty was strength. Detective Chen was there, older now but still sharp. Margaret Cross had come, bringing her entire legal team to volunteer pro bono services. Vincent had sent flowers from Montana with a card that said simply, "Keep being loud." Serafina stood at the microphone and looked at faces that represented the only legacy that mattered. "This building exists because people made impossible choices," she said. Helena Davies died defending a principle. Marco bled out buying time. Vincent survived when he shouldn't have. Dorian Varelli spent 30 years in prison for choosing protection over pragmatism. She paused. "And I survived because I refused to be convenient, because I was too loud, too difficult, too much trouble, because I wouldn't disappear quietly like everyone wanted." She looked at the women in the audience who knew exactly what that meant. So this building is for every person who's been told they're too much, for everyone who's survived systems designed to destroy them, for everyone who's learned that being difficult isn't a flaw, it's resistance. She felt emotion tightening her throat but pushed through it. "We name this the Helena Davies Center for Survival, because that's what this is. Not recovery, not healing, not inspiration, survival. Messy and complicated and loud. Exactly the way she would have wanted." She cut the ribbon. The crowd applauded. And Serafina walked through doors that represented everything Helena and Marco had died for. Proof that survival could mean something. Proof that fighting back was possible. Proof that the system could be changed even when it seemed impossible. The sun set over the city that had tried to erase her, painting the sky in colors that looked like fire and hope mixed together. Serafina stood on the steps watching it, feeling the weight of years and choices and everything she'd survived to get here. A text message arrived from a number she didn't recognize. "Heard about the center. Helena would be proud. Stay loud." "D," she smiled, typed back, "always." Then she went inside to do the work that mattered, helping other people survive systems designed to destroy them, teaching them that being difficult was strength, showing them that voices mattered even when staying quiet seemed safer. The families were mostly gone now, dismantled piece by investigations Dorian's cooperation had enabled. Some members were in prison, others had fled. A few remained, but weakened, fractured, unable to operate with the same impunity they'd once enjoyed. The world hadn't been fixed. Systems still protected power and punished resistance. Women were still being discarded and silenced and told to disappear. But now there was proof that fighting back was possible. Now there was evidence that survival could be loud. Now there was a building full of resources that existed because people had chosen principles over pragmatism and paid the price willingly. That had to count for something. That had to mean something. That had to matter. Serafina believed it did. And she'd spent the last 10 years of her life proving it to anyone who'd listen, and plenty of people who wouldn't. She'd become exactly what everyone had feared she'd be, someone who refused to disappear, someone who survived loudly, someone who proved that being too much trouble was sometimes the only way to survive at all. Helena had died for that proof. Marco had bled out for it. Dorian was serving 15 more years for it, and Serafina was living it. Every single day, loudly, defiantly, exactly the way they'd all wanted her to. Years from now, when someone asked her if it had been worth it, all the pain and trauma and complicated choices, she'd think about this moment. Standing on the steps of a building that existed because people had refused to accept that some lives were disposable, looking at a city that had tried to erase her and failed, knowing that somewhere in a prison 3 states away, a man who'd nearly died protecting her was probably smiling. And she'd say yes, not because the answer was simple, not because the pain was justified, not because redemption was clean or survival was noble or any of the comfortable lies people told themselves about trauma, but because she was still here, still breathing, still fighting, still loud, and that somehow was enough. That would always be enough. The door closed behind her, the sun finished setting, and Serafina Vale, the woman who'd been sent to disappear and had become a revolution instead, went back to the work of surviving, loudly, permanently, on her own terms, the way it should have been from the beginning, the way it would be until the end.